Another beautiful day in Mountain Village. So a quick little change to the agenda. Maybe we shouldn't use the word quick, but hopefully quick. We talked yesterday, we moved one of the big game season structure votes to this morning. So Danielle, hopefully, I don't know if I told Danielle you were first.
I'm first? Okay.
Probably should have. Are you okay with that? Because we can.
Sure.
Do you want to, Commissioner Adams, do you want to do that while Danielle's getting ready? Okay. Commissioner Adams is going to speak to the handout that just got passed around, and then we will talk about the rifle and deer elk seasons and fill in from there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I just handed out to the commissioners one of the resources that was shared at the Ideas Summit in Denver a couple of weeks ago, and it's just an equity, inclusion, and diversity vocabulary. Again, I think one of the challenges in the work is that we're all defining terms differently, and so there's no one perfect term for things, but I think if we can start to get some common language around and some common normings around how we're using terminology is really important. In addition to that, I'll also provide a link to Laura. There is a Google group that has formed of those folks that participated in the summit, and there's a lot of different resources and things that they've posted there. So if there are people that are interested, anybody who's passionate about these issues of equity in the outdoors are welcome to join that group. And so I'll make sure and provide that link to Laura so that gets posted somewhere. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. I just want, anytime I see the word equity now, there's a meme. I don't know if you shared the meme with me of the box, and I love that meme. So if any of you haven't seen it, Google equity, and there's a picture, a little meme of equity versus equality. I just think, I love it. It's just a very quick, 1,000-word, picture is 1,000 words, so. Okay, Danielle.
Great.
Take it away. Thank you.
So I don't know, Laura, if you can pull up, perfect. And maybe just go to the last 4 slides. All right. So did everyone get a copy of this kind of revised, just rifles alternative document that was handed out this morning? Perfect. So what I tried to do last night is show 3 different options that we could do for the rifle seasons. And then I also created a slide with a calendar so you could visually see, at least for 2020, what that would look like. So again, this slide here was the original staff recommendation that you heard yesterday. Basically, we would increase the breaks between all of the 4 rifle seasons and at least double them. But that did result in the second and the third seasons both being 7 days, so no season with 2 weekends. If you look at the second revised document, that would be on page 3, this is kind of the direction I was kind of hearing from the commission yesterday of increasing the break between first and second and making the second season have at least 2 weekends. So we'd have one of those rifle seasons that had 2 weekends. So you'll see this increases the break between first and second from 2 to 9 days, but it does keep the break between second and third season 5 days, which is what we currently have in our current season structure. And then again, it has a longer break between third and fourth, going from 2 to 4. So what I wasn't completely clear, and I wanted to make sure that the commission could give us some good direction on which break is most important. Is the break between first and second more important, or is the break between second and third most important in your preferences? So just so that we could have a good conversation today, I also included a third option for you to think about, which basically keeps the same 2-day break between the first and the second season, but really increases that break between the second and the third from 5 to 9 days, and then a 2 to 7 day break between the third and the fourth. So there's different ways to think about it. I guess, you could have more animal movement earlier in the seasons, but more pressure with the hunters in the over-the-counter seasons in second and third. So I just thought visually it might be good to see some different options And then I kind of laid out what I see to be the pros and cons of each alternative. And obviously, if none of these are kind of what you're looking for, we can come back in September and talk about this more. But those were kind of the three main options that kind of stuck out to me last night when I was trying to rethink some options for you guys to think about.
Thank you, Danielle. Commissioner Garcia.
So, yeah, I'm a visual person. I'd love to see what that calendar actually looks like. If you start on the 10th, but the 10th doesn't fall on a Saturday, what do we do? And what does it look like?
So the way that the framework is written, it doesn't start on the 10th. It starts on the second Saturday or the Saturday after the 9th. So it will always be that Saturday.
Gotcha, okay. So, I'm sorry, do you have this with the longer break being the other break?
Yeah. So here's the one that's a longer break between first and second, which is kind of where we were talking about yesterday.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Haskett.
I like this one with the longer break between first and second. I think that's one of the most important breaks.
Commissioner Bray.
I concur, because the break between second and third is still pretty reasonable. So I concur if we can keep a pretty decent break between first and second, and a pretty decent break between second and third. Between third and fourth isn't quite as important, but it still gains a couple of days, so I'm liking what I see there.
Commissioner Vehil.
If Commissioner Haskett says it's fine, it's fine.
Commissioner Garcia.
And I just, for the record and for the public's edification, it helped me a lot. There was talk about, and I even brought it up yesterday, doing away with the fourth. And if I'm not imposing on Commissioner Bray, if he could give a brief version of what he told me of why we need to keep the fourth, I think it would be helpful. It helped me a lot.
Commissioner Bray.
Well, several season structures ago, when at least 3, maybe 4, the fourth season was added kind of as an afterthought, and it was elk only. And we went that way for several years, and then staff came to us and proposed adding deer to the fourth season on a very limited basis. It would be a highly desired hunt. The tags would be severely limited, and in some areas, if the deer objectives weren't where they needed to be, there wouldn't be any tags. And it's predominantly a resident season. Residents like that season. It's more accommodating to them and whatnot. And I think it's proven its worth, particularly when we keep the license, particularly on the deer side, because we're in the edge of the rut, if not in the rut.
That was the important part, thank you.
And if we keep them severely limited, which they have been, it kind of helps on the preference point thing. And I think it's been a success.
Director Prenzlow.
Might add that's exactly right, but I'm getting old enough, I have even more history, that we had historically 3 seasons, but the second, if I recall, the second season was 12 days, and some outfitters would book 5 days in that season, take 2 days off and book a second. And we went to 9 days in that season. The discussion at the time, and actually Commissioner Raftopoulos and Craig was the one that said we should add a 4th season because you couldn't double book even, and you really can't double book in a 9-day season because it was 12. So that's part of history. Deer is limited in 4th so that, it's not an over-the-counter deer tag. But that's back to that history, as it was creating 4 options for outfitters, not just 3. They had 4 prior.
Commissioner Vehil.
I know in the DAU where I'm at, that's a popular season with the local folks, very popular. Because It's south, far enough south that the climate is good, weather's great that time of the year. And if you get something, you don't have to 5 minutes later put it in a cooler or get it into an ice box.
So it sounds like, Danielle, do you, given the discussion, can you help us form a motion, or does maybe Commissioner Bray or Haskett have a motion they'd like to put on the floor? Or Danielle, if you could help us, that would,
Would you help us?
Sure. Something like, is there a motion to approve the revised regular rifle deer and elk season with a longer break between first and second as provided by staff?
So moved.
moved by Commissioner Haskett, second by Commissioner Vehil. Voice vote. Laura, can you please call the, oh, I'm sorry, discussion. Commissioner Bray.
Point of order. That makes the second season till 9 days with 2 weekends, correct?
Correct.
With 2 weekends.
That's what we wanted, so.
Thank you for that. I think that's important.
Yes, all the season dates for the 5 years should be outlined then on page 3 of this revised document. So that is the version that you would be approving with that motion.
Okay, we're ready to call the roll.
Adams,
Yes.
Lecca,
Yes.
Ray,
Yes,
Garcia,
Yes.
Haskett,
Yes.
Hauser,
Yes.
McDaniel,
Yes.
Schaefer,
Yes.
Hardy,
Yes.
Vehil,
Yes.
Chair Zimmerman.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Danielle. And one, just before we let you go, there was some discussion, just, on email and from public and whatnot from the public comment yesterday regarding Eastern Plains deer. And if I can take the liberty to take about 5 minutes out of the morning to discuss that a little further, I think that would help some of the public comment that we've been hearing. So I don't know if maybe Commissioner Vehil wants to take that.
I would. I couldn't sleep last night thinking about that early rifle season. And I went back and read emails last night about 3 o'clock in the morning, which is productive time because it was quiet around the hotel. But I just think that we need to keep that Plains first rifle deer status quo rather than making the change that we discussed yesterday. And that's my thought, and I'd like to have other commissioners chime in with their comments.
Commissioner Haskett.
Thank you. I agree with Commissioner Vehil. I also think the important part of that is the CWD and the biology. We're at $40 per 100 does, and that's way over what's recommended for CWD. We're going to test out there this year, I understand, but I think we really need to look at that part of it if we want to keep our herd health also.
Commissioner Garcia.
I agree in my further understanding of the real world and the fact that a large amount of that hunting is private land, and it is agriculture, and it is controlled by the ranchers. I think was important to me too, and I also agree that status quo would be a better answer.
Commissioner Bray.
it would be helpful for me to have,
Commissioner Bray, sorry to interrupt you. Can you pull the mic just a little bit closer?
it would be helpful
you.
for me to have a graphic like this with what we voted on and approved versus status quo as far as a calendar. I know I do share those concerns that's been expressed. I think the landowner community out there is used, they're the folks that don't interchange with us very much on a regular basis, most of them anyway. But they're, from talking to staff and others, they seem to be pretty happy with what's going on, so it'd be helpful.
Laura,
Have those.
can you go back to page of this presentation that's up, I think it's page 5, that has the calendar? Yeah, page 5 of 13 of the PowerPoint that has the calendar for Plains First Rifle Deer.
Perfect, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if that's helpful at all, Commissioner Bray, or Danielle, if you can help point out what we're talking about here.
Sure, so the calendar that's on your left would be the status quo calendar, and the motion that you guys made yesterday would be to move that season to be the 20th through the 31st annually. So it would kind of change this calendar on your left to run slightly later into October, so start a little bit later, but it wouldn't go into November at all like the status quo calendar that staff is recommending.
So basically trades 2 days on each end?
Director Prenslow?
3 days, yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think the big difference is what you voted yesterday ends in October. The current season will run into about a week into November. So that's the, you're talking about a week, and you took away November yesterday at the vote. The current goes in a week into November, which was Commissioner McDaniel's issue in the run.
Commissioner Vehil?
It's not always easy to admit that you made a mistake, but I'm admitting that I made a mistake on that issue yesterday. So my goal is to try to correct that mistake.
Commissioner McDaniel?
I won't make a second impassioned, as long as impassioned speech about it. I do think it's really important to just think about a couple things. One, where if you look at the last 5 years and the next 5 years, we're not talking about a week. We're talking about just a few days, a couple, 3 days on most of those years that the shift is actually occurring. One of the things I did say yesterday too was, potentially maybe the staff could come back, since I kind of came up with the 20th to the 31st on the fly, and give us a different thought in September before we take a different action. I do believe that we as an agency, and we heard this yesterday through a lot of the other rifle comments, we try to set our season structure based on many things, but one of them is really important is wildlife principles. One of those principles to me is that, if you look at all those seasons, we do not allow hunting when the animals are most vulnerable. And this is one season in which we do. And we don't really have to change it that much to affect that greatly, just a few days. So I think that's really something that we should take into strong consideration before sticking with the current season which we have, which quite frankly, because of the way the calendar shakes out, doesn't turn out to be just a few days into November. And just in this 20 to 24 structure, you'll see that 8th to 9th, I think it's years, and can't pick it out right now on that map, but it goes to the 8th or 9th, which means that the first basically 2 weeks of November would be in that rifle season, along with the last week, which means the entire rut would be open to rifle season. Yeah, it'd be 21 and 22.
Yeah, the latest.
Yeah, the latest would be the 9th. And again, as I expressed yesterday, depending on what scientific literature you read, 80 to 90% of the does are bred the last week of October and the first weeks of November. And so I really do struggle with that from a principle from which we stand on in setting big game structures. That why with this species we choose to ignore that principle. When we could really, I think, manage around it with a little bit of flexibility. And we don't do that because of vulnerability. And I heard yesterday from Mr. Lemmer, who gave a very, a great discussion about his perspective about it, that, it's kind of what I heard was no harm, no foul. And I kind of don't agree with that, theology or whatever, or ideology. If that was the case, let's hunt whitetails in February when they're desperate for food, still have horns. As long as we don't really affect the herd size, we should allow it. And I just don't agree with that. I think that we set those structures and those game seasons during this September through November seasons for the reason of giving, managing the herd health and the biology, but also fair chase. That we do not put the animals at such a disadvantage, in this case where the corn's been cut and they have less cover, and they're in a rutting activity, so they're going to be moving during the day, and not have I'll call it a better chance for, hunter against prey. So that's my second impassioned speech about it. I would prefer we don't vote on it again, but that we give the agency a chance to come back, take into consideration the discussion that's been had in September and say, if you still feel strongly about going clear back to the status quo, we can vote on that in December. And if not, perhaps the agency can give us, maybe there's a day or two tweak here and there that we can split this difference and provide that balance between wildlife and our sportsmen and our landowners. And again, I am a landowner. I get, and I do understand the private land issue out there, and they've been very cooperative with us. And the last thing I want to do is anger all of them at the CPW. I do think there's a solution in there someplace. And maybe the one I came up with on the fly yesterday, the 20th, 31st, isn't exactly the one, but maybe there is one out there that smarter minds than mine in the agency can come up with. My second impassioned speech in 2 days.
So it sounds like, so I've got a bit of a timing issue. And so hold on to that impassioned speech for just a minute. So we do have an individual from Colorado Leftover Watch that has to speak yesterday, and you're okay? Okay. He has to leave by 9, and so I didn't want to, he came back today to speak, and I didn't want to lose that. So, okay, thank you for your flexibility there. So it sounds like we've got two things on the floor here, and Commissioner Bray, I did see your hand, but it sounds like we can either vote on, take a vote on going to status quo, or ask staff to come back to us in September with more information specific around biology. That's what I'm hearing. I do have 2 public comment sheets on this, and I think Commissioner Bray wants to make another comment. So let's take Commissioner Bray, let's take public comment, and then let's see if we can decide whether we want to vote or push to September. Commissioner Bray.
I could support coming back in September with a revisit with new information. It gives the landowner community out there 60 days to comment, and perhaps, as Commissioner Daniel just maybe we can tweak the numbers a little and reach a compromise. Maybe we can't, but I think it sounds reasonable for a cooling off period and a reconsideration. As long as we agree to reconsider it in September, I'm comfortable with that.
I agree.
Okay, thank you. Let's take public comment. I've got Dan Gates, if you'd like to, East Plains season.
Thank you again, Chairman, Commissioners. Dan Gates for the Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management. Just a point of clarification from my perspective. I hunted the East Plains last year along with my son, and we were fortunate enough to have multiple areas to be able to hunt up and around the Ray area, in Area 102. And after months of searching out places to hunt and making contacts, we were still told, you can get on our place as soon as we cut the corn. So because it's all private out there, for the most part, except for some of the state wildlife areas that we were fortunate enough to be able to hunt, but then you get into the crowding issue because everybody else was kind of put in the same position. The public hunters were forced to go to the public state wildlife areas because a lot of them were told, you can hunt our property when we take the corn down. It wasn't so much trying to give the deer an unfair advantage or of staying in the corn, or the hunter an unfair advantage of having no corn. It was an access component. And I think with the 10-day season, the longer that you wait, not going into December, per Commissioner McDaniel's points, it gives the hunter the opportunity to actually have the access that's available on those properties. And if you're waiting 2 to 3 years, or in an outfitter's position, having multiple individuals to come in at that specific time, and I'm not advocating on the outfitting side or not outfitting side, but you don't have the opportunity to just turn around and buy something over the counter, and you don't have the opportunity to just go to a public land spot unless you're going to go to the state wildlife area, which there's a fair amount of individuals that were doing that during that specific season. A lot of the guys I've spoke to since then have indicated that the later season is the better time to go because there was no corn, there was no access problems. Most of those guys would allow people to go at will. Now, I'm just talking the northeastern part of the state. Don't know the specifics on the southeast or around the Burlington or the Lyman area, but I think it would be well considered to maybe look at the status quo position until there's more information that's provided or until you guys have some input from the landowners out of each one of those three geographical areas, from the southeast, the middle part of the state, and the northeast. So thank you for the time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions, or I'll sit down and shut the hell up and you can move with the agenda. So,
Thanks, Dan. Any questions for Dan?
thank you very much.
And our second public comment is Kent Ingram. Kent, did you want to talk about East Plains, or did you want to let us make a decision here and then talk about big game season structure dates?
Actually, just make a couple of comments
Okay.
as it relates to today's changes out there. And once again, thanks for the opportunity. I think it does, the second season is traditionally a lower success ratio, okay? It's tough, and so I support the changes for going to this two-weekend aspect of the second season because it's really tough. The bulls are not bugling. They've made their adjustments. They're not with the cows very much. And so it makes sense on elk to go with that longer season in the second season. But there are unintended consequences, and you're pushing the third season more into November. And that's okay. But just realize that it maybe goes beyond today's decisions, that it's going to make the deer more vulnerable in November. And hopefully in the license allocation process, they will move more of the deer tags into the second season and fewer deer tags in the third season, because as you move into the middle of November, you're in the mule deer rut. And so I would hope that they judiciously limit the number of tags for mule deer in that third season. That's my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Ingram. Any questions for Kent? Okay, so let's see if we can make a decision. If we want to take a vote on status quo, the staff recommendation, or if we want to ask the staff to come back to us in September with more information. Commissioner Garcia.
I'm torn, and only because the one thing that I heard yesterday is we keep delaying a decision, and these people need calendars. That's my only concern. We're going to wait until September to tell these people when they're going to hunt in a few weeks.
Well, it's for 2020.
A year from now.
This is for 2020.
2020.
Still, I agree. I think, yeah.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Haskett.
I think for the plains hunt or east of I-25, I think we can wait until September and ask staff to come back, get some landowner comments. That's not as crucial as the big game seasons. They're all big game seasons, but
Right, the vote we just did.
yeah,
Okay.
I think that, I'll make a motion that we wait till September and come back with more staff information and landowners.
Okay, and
comments.
I don't think we need to vote on that necessarily, but we certainly can if that's Jake.
So yesterday you took action on this
Sorry.
item that is in force until it's either stayed or vacated. So if you want to stay the effectiveness of what you did yesterday until September 6th, that would be an appropriate motion. You don't need to vacate what you did yesterday. Let's say you stay it until September 6th, you do nothing, then that yesterday's action sort of springs back into effect, and you don't need to take another vote.
Commissioner Haskett.
What I'm suggesting is if you want to discuss this further in September, I think the appropriate motion would be to stay the effectiveness of yesterday's vote until September 6th.
As opposed to vacating yesterday's vote
Yeah, you
and
can do
leaving it
either,
open.
But I'm not sure if there's will either way.
Director Prenslow.
On that specific subject, not the rest of it.
Yes. Commissioner Haskett.
So so how do I do that? I make a motion to stay the Eastern Plains
Vote from yesterday.
motion from yesterday.
Second.
Till September 6th.
Until September 6th, okay. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to do a roll call vote. Sorry, motion was Commissioner Haskett, second was Commissioner McDaniel. Laura, please call the roll.
Adams,
Yes.
Bleka,
Yes.
Ray,
Yes.
Garcia,
Yes.
Haskett,
Yes.
Hauser,
Yes.
McDaniel,
Yes.
Schaefer,
Yes.
Barty,
Yes.
Vihil,
Yes.
Chair Zimmerman.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Commissioner Haskett.
And I want to revisit the archery. I don't know if that was brought up to you, but let's let this gentleman speak first.
Okay, sounds good. So is that clear, Danielle, for what we
Yes.
are looking for? Great. Okay, Justin Moore with Colorado Leftover Watch. Thank you for your patience, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. That was far more important than anything I got to say. If it makes any difference, I love the status quo dates. Good morning, Commission, Director Brinslow. Some of you know who I am. For those of you that don't, my name is Justin Moore. I own and operate the Colorado Leftover Watch mobile app. What we do is we monitor the leftover list, and we notify subscribers when returned licenses become available through the reissue process. As an avid hunter in the state of Colorado, I wanted to create the most efficient way possible for all sportsmen and women to take advantage of the opportunities that you create for us. And I like to think that the smiles and quotes that we have on our social media show a small portion of the success our solution had last year. I approached the division, or the agency, as you're called now, in the winter of 2017 to create the solution for the agency rather than run it as a private entity, because instant notifications can only come from the Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Unfortunately, the contract that you folks have with Aspira prevents that at the moment. And I want to preface what I'm about to say by saying that I think that the relationship that the Parks and Wildlife has with Aspira gets a bad rap from the general public unfairly. Any problems that we've had with Aspira's services have all been first world problems. We still get our hunting and fishing licenses, we still get our park passes, and we're still able to communicate with the Parks and Wildlife in an efficient manner. What I came to ask is that during negotiations to either extend Aspira's contract beyond June of 2020 or to commission a new provider through an RFI, that third-party APIs are negotiated, because I know that I'm not the only third-party vendor to approach the agency with a solution that you've been interested in taking advantage of. Whether that's creating efficiencies within the existing system or generating new revenue streams, we haven't been able to work with you folks. And all that we ask is the opportunity to create solutions that the Parks and Wildlife and Aspira alone might not be able to generate because you're just too busy. Looks like I'm running short on time, but I look forward to preventing our citizens' petition regarding how reissued licenses are sold online after a season had started in November. And I open the floor up to any questions that you have regarding third-party APIs.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. And Commissioner Vihil.
For the unliterate, what is an API?
It's an application program interface. Essentially, it makes it so that my program can interface with your program, and when reissued licenses become available, we can notify our subscribers instantly.
Thank you.
And that currently doesn't, 'cause
No, so-
you are able to notify, but there's a lag, is that my understanding?
Correct. So what we do now is we run a server that searches the leftover list once per minute, and essentially I can have as much as a 60-second delay behind real-time notifying subscribers.
Any other questions for Mr. Moore? Any questions directed to staff? We do have the iPause update coming up next, so I imagine they might touch on this. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, folks.
All right, do we want to go back and, Commissioner Haskett, we're going to talk quickly about archery, and then we'll move on to Corey Chick.
I would like to revisit the archery issue. I think we need to make a decision today as far as the language. Just, if we wait till September, that is archery season. A lot of the archers were here yesterday and testified. I have an idea, I'd like to see what everybody thinks, but the limited or unlimited is a big issue. There's a lot of emotions with that. A lot of people have limited units, and then the unlimited units next to those get a ton of pressure because it's pushing those people to them. What if we were to just change it to by DAU? And if there's limited units in that DAU, they all become limited. And then the DAUs that have unlimited over-the-counter tags stay that way. It's an idea.
Any thoughts around that idea? Commissioner Bray?
Yeah, I'd like to get some staff input. That part of what we've got on the table was staff would start issue papers to limit certain units as needed biologically. And so that change would say if staff wants to do that, it would mean at the DAU level, not just the unit level. Is that acceptable?
Danielle, any thoughts on Commissioner Bray's? Oh, I'm sorry, Director Prenzel. Okay, Danielle.
It's really not my subject matter expertise to talk about that. I would have to defer to regional managers and terrestrial to talk about.
Director Prenzel.
I said it was not job security when I tried to talk to you about qualifying licenses, so I'll take a stab at this, why not? You paid the big bucks. You could go either way. I would, I guess I would come back that I have some flexibility. If you took a vote and said you left it at the staff recommendation, which is staff would have to come with issue papers, there is flexibility at my level to make sure that those are not too often and are well thought out. Why? Before they ever get to the commission at the issue paper. And so we do kill or amend issue papers at reg review before they ever get here as just an issue paper. So you see only agreed upon issue papers. So short answer, I believe we have that safety net already. And if you start creating sideboards, DAU is not a bad idea, but you can address that at the issue paper stage. There may be a reason it should be GMU specific and not DAU, or it could be a DAU because you'll want to affect that whole, that whole DAU. But I think you could, my opinion, I think you could take a vote and you still have the safety net because you still control the issue paper on anything that would go limited for archery in those units. And again, the intent was biological, so what I would encourage is that if the commission is so inclined to make that vote today, that you keep it at that there's good, justifiable biological, or it could be social too, but you could put some parameters around that. I would be less inclined to have parameters around geography.
Danielle, it sounds like, okay, Commissioner Behill, and then I know staff just came up and talked to Danielle as well.
Oh, okay. But the reason I like the DAU better, or one of the positives, is that when it's if we do it by game management unit, it pushes hunters to the unlimited area. But if we make it DAU, then that kind of cures that, so it's more balanced in managing the herds.
Danielle, I think I see Mr. Holland and Matt Eckert and Reed DeWald all surrounding. Do you have an
Huddling me.
update?
I feel their presence
I saw the
too.
director waving his hand.
So the one point that they wanted me to clarify is whether you're talking about totally limiting DAUs for the archery season or totally limiting them overall, because there is a whole separate petition citizen process to completely limit a GMU or a DAU. And so just wanted clarification too on that.
Archery.
Archery.
Director Prenzo.
My only clarification for Commissioner Vehil is, you're correct. And again, we can live with either biologically, but whether you close a GMU or close a DAU, you're still going to displace over-the-counter archery hunters to some geography. It's just, you would just close more GMUs in a DAU, but you're going to displace everybody in a DAU to another DAU.
You're going to move them further.
Exactly. Well said. So,
Thank you.
Mr. Holland, would you like to add?
Thank you. Andy Holland, Big Game Manager. And so, as far as I understand where you're going, Commissioner Haskett, I think this is what Director Prenslow was chiming in on as well. We already have that option, and we've had numerous issue papers over the last 5 years from the Southwest and Northwest regions to limit particular DAUs for archery. And the way those have always come down internally, where we felt internally where we're already at essentially the tipping point where those hunters, as Director Prenslow just said, they will domino into other units, and we're already we already are hearing that there's a lot of hunters in all of our over-the-counter units. And so if you start dominoing more of those currently over-the-counter archery into limited, it'll just exacerbate the issue in others. And so we're actually sitting in one of the DAUs where we had an issue paper 4 years ago. And we pretty much punted on that because we knew that would just change the whole landscape in all the surrounding areas. So we have that, I guess in short, we have that option right now with issue papers for archery only. To go totally limited, like Danielle said, is that public nomination process for a DAU.
Director Prenslow. Thank you, Andy.
thank you, Andy. The other thing I would add is that based generally in a 5-year season structure, we've tried to decline most of those applications. The most, in my opinion, the most interesting thing that Commissioner McDaniel started yesterday was that if you take that vote, you can let the constituents know that we're open to starting those discussions, which historically we really did not. We tried not to make those changes on the fly in a 5-year season structure. And so if you take that vote, you're saying we will start looking at those issue by issue paper, which historically we've not. So I think I think it gets us halfway there. I don't know if that's as far as you'd like to go, but that's a change, because other than we made a change in E16 last year, the first salvo out of that was, that's usually a 5-year season structure issue. We don't like to start picking and choosing outside of that structure.
Just a quick point, question. We received quite a bit of public comment on the archery season. Would a vote on staff recommendation, obviously now, with the safety net of having issue papers and being able to look at these things, does that also address some of the concerns we've heard with regard to public comment? Can we also, if some of those things come up, as they come up, be able to address them, or is that a different focus?
Well, I think you heard a lot of public comment about addressing the overcrowding and that you need to limit. If you have over-the-counter, whether it's either sex or bull only, you can't really control the crowding. So I don't think we can really address the public comments that you heard yesterday by going in that direction, but.
Okay, thank you, that helps. So it sounds like we have a potential motion on the floor, or could have a potential motion regarding staff. I'll just read it. Look at this. I got it right here. Is there a motion to approve the 2020 to 2024 big game season structure staff recommendations for the early seasons for deer and elk west of I-25 and GMU 140 as outlined in section 1? Is that correct? Okay. Do we have that motion? No? Okay.
Until September on that issue.
Right, and what Commissioner Haskett is saying is, can we pull it back from September and vote on it today? Am I understanding correctly?
Well, with changes, but I think I guess we're gonna have to wait till September. Maybe staff can come up with some ideas. Marvin, I mean, he was on the right track there. I was just trying to make it go forward with some ideas.
Yeah, so we could get some information out to the public. Director Prenzlow.
If you're summarizing, I want to make sure right, you took staff recommendation from yesterday, but instead of at the GMU specific issue paper, it would only be DAU specific. Is that correct?
Commissioner
Can it
Vito.
be either or, as biology dictates?
I don't have an issue if you wanted to make that recommendation to see where you're at, or you can come back in September. That's a little tweak. What, Danielle, correct me, what the recommendation is that it is now it's unspecific by GMU or DAU. It's allowable by staff to come with issue papers to limit specific units in the 5-year season structure. So if you're good with GMU or DAU, I think that motion is already encompassed in the recommendation from yesterday.
Commissioner Garcia.
I'm confused because the area that I know the most is the Grand Lake area, and we probably are the hardest hit by this issue in terms of overcrowding of archers. And my concern is that if we don't begin to limit, the over-counter is not working. And so I'm just not comfortable with the recommendation. The staff recommendation allows for that over-the-counter to continue. And I don't want to vote to allow that over-the-counter to continue. And so this, I believe, Commissioner Haskett's proposal is that we start limiting, and I feel strongly that we do. I'm not sure that it's a GAU. That's my hitch right now, is how we do that.
Commissioner Schaefer.
Thank you. I think there is a general sentiment of concern regarding limiting licenses and being able to control for the crowding issues and hiring experience issues that we have heard that have been identified as a top priority. However, the idea of issue papers, one of the problems has been the illustration, like they aren't coming forward often because of this question of season structure. That coupled with, my concern of wanting to make sure that there's a level of transparency around the decision-making process and that we are demonstrating that we do have a concern about overcrowding issues. Is there a way where we're able to try and front-load that issue paper process for this year so that it is part of the process moving forward when we start implementing in 2020? So is there a way where these series of issue papers that have been discussed for quite a few years, that there is a discrepancy or a conversation within staff on whether this is the right idea or not? I don't care about DAU or GMU level, but moving that forward in a way where we're being diligent about expediting that process and making certain it's transparent. I think that is something that I'm really interested in. That may not be September in terms of articulating these specific DAUs or GMUs, but doing so before, we're sending brochures out for 2020 would be great.
Director Prenzlow.
You could, if that was the request, we would for sure need to come back in September and do that staff work. The two we've heard most, there are questions around the state, but I think some of the discussion is totally limited or some portion of not totally limited in archery. And so the couple, and I don't know which they are off the top of my head, maybe Andy can say. I know there's some biological concern on numbers of elk in the Southwest. And so I could see coming back with limit by DAU or GMU in the next 5 years, and here's a couple thoughts right off the bat.
So it sounds like we could potentially have a motion, right? A motion to approve staff recommendation with the tweak that we limit at the GMU or DAU level, and we start having that conversation right away. Is that more accurate? I'm getting a kind of nod, kind of blank stare. Commissioner McDaniel, and then I think let's either try to make a motion or move on.
Okay, well, I'm not sure I'll help you advance that. I just don't feel I have enough data. I'll just be honest with you, I don't have enough facts or data to render an opinion about it. I think, to be expedient moving forward, we could approve this with language that says that we do reserve the right to limit tags either at the GMU or DAU level as the agency feels necessary, but that we also direct them to come back with additional data around, herd population, sportsman interest, demand, and so forth, and give us a recommendation about that prior to the 20 season starting. Probably wouldn't be effective in 20. I don't think we'll get there fast enough, but it would probably be effective in 21 and moving forward if we decided they needed to be limited. Otherwise, I think we're going to get stuck, and we are, in this little circle about, I find it hard to vote to limit even at a GMU level when I don't know what the data says in detail, hasn't been analyzed and presented that says we should do so.
Director Prenslow.
I think if you made that vote today, staff could come back in September with additional information, and you either could concur on that vote or make an adjustment, and that would be our preference. So we're not waiting a year. But if you did that, that gives us enough surety, we come back with a couple thoughts, and you could feel comfortable about your vote or tweak it at that point.
So moved.
Commissioner Haskett.
So moved.
Garcia. So moved. Commissioner
I'll
Haskett.
second it, but with one comment.
Okay.
I would like to see, especially the Southwest and the Southeast, come back with maybe some issue papers for 2020, because it is a critical area. I don't think we have time to wait till 21.
For certain areas?
Yes.
Okay. Laura, did you get that motion in second?
Yes.
Okay. Any other further discussion? Let's call the roll.
Adams.
Yes.
Lecca.
Yes.
Ray.
Yes.
Garcia.
Yes.
Haskett.
Yes.
Hauser.
Yes.
McDaniel.
Yes.
Schaefer. Barty.
Yes.
Behill. Chair Zimmerman.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay. Danielle, staff, thank you. Thanks for the discussion around that, and Commissioner Haskett for bringing it up. I think that
Sleep tonight? Or are you going to?
our sportsmen and women will be appreciative of us taking a vote today. All right, Corey Chick with the iPause update.
Morning, Commission, Chair, Director. Chair, if you're okay with it, if I can address APIs first?
Yes, please. Thank you.
And that is correct. Our current contract does not allow for third-party APIs. It's not that we're necessarily,
Closer to the mic.
sorry.
Thank you.
I got to scoot it up. There we go. It's not that I'm necessarily opposed to them. I think the agency should learn quite a bit more about them, talk with our vendor about that. I guess off the top, I would look at security issues, potentially, allowing someone else to tap into our system. I guess I would just like to have a little bit more data on that before we really went into that realm. But
Is that something you think your former branch will be able to look into over the next handful of months, or?
they can.
Okay.
Yeah. And they're not cheap. So I mean, that would need to be a stipulation of it, as well as, who's going to pay for that? I don't think that necessarily should fall on our agencies, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, iPause. So today I was, first I'm honored to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak with you and give you an update on iPause. Really what we wanted to touch on today is the network, which is managed by OIT. what we've implemented to address these, any network issues that we've had since go live. Major changes since our last update, and what Aspira has approved or improved to eliminate issues that occurred last year on leftover license day. I was going to introduce Lauren to talk a little bit about network. I kind of don't really see an issue unless the commission would like Lauren up here. Really, and really the reason is we're continuing to build those relationships. I think a little further on, and once we understand really those relationships with network, we'll be able to provide a better update. I can touch on some of the network issues that we've had since go live, whether that be slowness or even short outages that we've incurred, and then how we address those. We have always tried to make backup processes for those outages. We never want to turn a customer away and say we can't issue a license, pass, or make a reservation. With relation to those three things, licenses, we do have backup stock that if someone is at an office or a park and wants to buy a license, that we can issue a license with backup stock. It's the same for passes. And then also, as it relates to reservations, Aspira does have a change request in so that their call center will be able to help out with that. So we will be able to make adjustments as it relates to that. Since our last update, we've gone live with Data Mart. That's a lot of the requests that y'all asked for. We now have a very powerful system now that we can go into and be able to pull some of that data. So when you're talking about the demographics or I mean, I could go on and on, but that's really the main way that we go in and extract that data out of the system about our customers and be able to provide that to you or for the agency to be able to make decisions. So. And just recently, we've gone live with the vehicle registrations. Very similar to go live, we've had a few hiccups related around data. Because we had these different systems that did collect data differently, VRS was no different. We were very robust on our hunt and fish side. So we collected a lot of data on the hunt and fish side. So when we went live with the system, our main issue, as we all remember back then, was the camping data and how they did not necessarily match up. We had a lot of duplicate accounts. We're having that similar issue with VRS, and we're in the process of, it's not me. We're having some of those similar issues with that data. I know we're working with Aspira right now to run reports, to find out how we can do auto merges and hopefully make that big problem a lot smaller problem. And then, of course, it's going to be manual after that, just like we did after go live. So more to come on that, but we're definitely working on it. Hunter reservations, it's probably about the last one I touch on. Hunter reservations will go live mid-August. Nice thing about hunter reservations is there's none of that data tied to it. So it should be that one should be a very smooth process and provide great customer service to our agency. So with that said, I would leave it open to questions where I can introduce Aspira.
Commissioner Bray.
Kind of a side question, I guess. You know, as we start talking about limiting licenses, previous discussion, whatnot, and in these over-the-counter units, can we get data that shows, or do you have data that shows how many hunters actually use a certain GMU? in an over-the-counter unit? Do you have at least a guess?
So I'm going to introduce Devin Adams, which is the iPOS administrator. She is the one a lot of times that knows exactly and does the data pulls, so.
He's taller than me. Commissioners, chairperson, director. We actually, when it comes to over-the-counter usage, that's collected through the Big Game Harvest Survey, which is run out of terrestrial. And I know that Mary Lloyd is our terrestrial data analyst, and she has a lot of that information. We can tell you who's buying what through the iPOS system, but at this point, terrestrial is one who collects actually who's using in those over-the-counter units.
Because that's going to be important information as we continue these discussions going down. Who and how many are we affecting in each unit? So just a heads up, that discussion's probably coming in the next calendar year, so we're probably going to need that information.
And thankfully, they have very robust data that they collect around that, and we actually do have those harvest surveys on our website, and Mary does in-depth analysis on it, so I'm sure that terrestrial can provide that for you.
Thank you. Should we bring iPOS? Oh, Commissioner Haskett.
I have a question, and I'm not sure exactly who to ask. So last year, we had a problem with people getting 2 licenses. We also had that problem this year.
Okay. I can touch on that. So about 2 weeks ago, we went to Texas and to their warehouse, and Aspira can touch on this too and let you know exactly what they put in place. But we did we did audit their process for fulfillment. While we were there, we did not see one single duplicate license. We do know that it happens, and the contract accounts for it, to where that certain level of error can occur as long as it doesn't reach a threshold. And I'm not sure exactly what the count is up to today. Do you know?
So last year, we had about around 2,500 duplicate licenses. This year, we are around, as of this morning, 31. So, and we're, last year at the same time, we had already reported 400. So it's significantly reduced over last year's.
Great. Let's bring Aspira up.
I'll introduce Seth Rosenberg, the president.
Good morning, Chair Zimmerman, members of the commission, director. I'm Seth Rosenberg, president of Aspira. I'll skip my agenda real quick and touch on the duplicates. And Steve's going to go into a bit more depth on the actual numbers. What happened last year on the duplicates was a system issue. So literally the system itself printing multiple licenses for me. And then we not having proper quality check processes in place to catch it on the human side. This year, we had no instances of the system actually printing duplicates. Our quality check process pulled approximately, as of today, 31 licenses. So people looking at licenses saying, you know what, this one is not clear enough, or the address is a little low for what the envelope requires. And we pulled those, reprinted them, and the error happened on those 31 was actually a manual process error. So 31 ended up that we pulled were sent in error, as well as the better duplicate is what happened on that one. And while we always want 0, 31 out of 204,000 is well within that acceptable variance level. But of course, our goal is 0, without a doubt. So this morning, I'm going to talk just real briefly, kind of an agenda. It'll only be a few minutes, don't worry. A quick look back on the last year, approximately 11 months really, and then talk a bit about some of the things coming forward, including apps. About 11 months ago to the day, I stood here. It was not a good day. It was 7 days after we had a terrible leftover on sale. And I committed one thing, and that was that we would do better, and that was it. Right? No promises that I couldn't stand behind. And I'm very happy to stand here today and say it's not perfect. Our goal, of course, is, I'm not sure that's ever reality in these types of massive systems, but in the last 11 months, we've launched multiple different components of the system. Corey touched on them, the vehicle registration, as well as others. We had a very successful draw process for big game. very successful fulfillment process for the licenses. Again, Steve will go into some of the details. And we're headed towards launching now the Hunter reservation system, as well as, of course, for the last 11 months, basically, almost a year, been working to ensure a smooth leftover on sale in about a few weeks, 2-3 weeks, right? And Steve's going to go into extensive technical detail on what we've done to ensure that's a successful day. And really, it comes down to, we were talking at breakfast, successful few minutes if we do this right, and that's the goal. Before I go any further, I want to personally thank Corey, his team, and the commission, but really Corey, who has been so instrumental in making this program a success and holding us accountable where we needed it. And never stopping and always being great with saying, you know what, you did a great job here, we need more focus here. And helping push us to a better level, which lets us, I think, all sit here today and say, you know what, are there some issues? Yeah, but the issues we're focusing on now are very, very minor in the grand scheme of things. And I think it's we thank everybody in this room and across the overall CPW for the help. I would like to take a chance to go look forward a little bit and touch on apps, which Chair Zimmerman, you and I spoke about probably 6-8 months ago about apps. And we're going to put up some slides. I say it with a question almost.
It should be, yeah.
So today we have a great website. We have an app through Reserve America, which provides full functionality around camping. Where we're headed, and I'm going to ask this kind of a funny question, if CPW would like, we would love to work with you on taking what we're working with Kansas today on, and this is in their contract. I know I'm often asked, well, why don't we have this already? And it's really just what was in the contract and what's not. With Kansas, we're in final testing of a hunting and fishing app. One of the core components, and you could see some of the bullets, the core components to me is that license on your phone. Doesn't matter if you're connected or not. It's almost if you think about if you fly on United today. You can put that boarding pass on your phone. It's secure. It can literally be updated, done right. Again, all these things will be, if CPW would like, and the commission will work with CPW to build this together. You can see there's also tags, digital tags. You can check in and out of GMUs, which I think talks to some of the better data collection over time. And again, this is what Kansas has asked for. This is just to show an example of what we can do together. Today, law enforcement app, right? And I think that's a very well-liked app. And we're headed towards full rollout of that now. And that's an app that really enables law enforcement to have more tools in their hand. Doesn't matter where they are. And this is just showing what this might look like for CPW, where the idea could be you're booking a camping reservation and you're offered on the app, the system's intelligent enough to know that there's fishing right there, offer a license on the app within the same flow, and that person has it, and that license would show up on their phone. They save it, they have their license with them. Any questions at all?
Any questions to this point? What's the, Commissioner Barty?
On these, thank you. On these apps, what's the level of specificity that we could kind of target? Could we have GPS coordinates and have maybe locations where an animal was taken? Could you get to that level of specificity on this kind of thing?
So I'm going to, our CTO will probably cringe at this, but the answer to me is yes. It's all about what gets scoped together, and then it has to be put into the contract.
And then, and then in terms of, we talked yesterday about park passes. I think we might have to do something on a policy side here to allow that. But if it did, is that something that
That
you
could
guys
also
run
be,
through there?
again, that could be part of the scope.
Okay, thank you.
And that's a very important point you brought up, that there will have to be supporting changes to rules and regulations and processes from the commission and CPW to allow for some of these things to happen, right? To allow for me to have a license that's only in digital form, right? Because some of the rules say you must be able to show it, in paper, on the proper stock. So, I'll like Steve Wade to come up, our Chief Technology Officer, to talk a little bit more in depth about some of what I spoke about, and to talk about the on sale that's coming.
Thank you.
Morning, everybody. Commissioners, Chairperson, Director. I'm Steve Wade. I'm the CTO of Aspira, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time actually recapping from the last time I was here, which was about 11 months ago, just after our on-sale problems, and give you all an update of what we've done. As Seth committed to at that point in time, we were going to improve. I think we've done a lot of work internally to improve a lot of our processes in terms of the fulfillment and the system. We have spent a lot of time making sure the capacity of the system is capable of handling the load that we're anticipating in a few weeks for OTC and leftover. It's about 140% greater than it was last year. Additionally, we are putting in a web-based queuing method that will protect the overall system from overload and put folks into a queue, very similar to what you see when you go buy tickets for concerts and things like that. It says, you'll be released into the system 10 seconds, 15 seconds, whatever it is. I'll be honest with you, I don't anticipate that the queuing mechanism will kick in, because I think the system is now robust enough to be able to handle the load, but it's there as a stopgap, as a safety measure, should we need it. And if anybody has any questions on detail of that, I can certainly go into it a lot more detail, but I don't want to start talking all technical and, Any questions on either of those two?
All right, looks like we're pretty good.
Okay, a couple of other points. Additionally, we did do some infrastructure work on the system, specifically for the state of Colorado. I think you may recall, if you understand the system a little bit, it is a shared system. So Colorado is one of multiple clients on the system. For the leftover and the OTC, we are actually segmenting a significant portion, actually adding a significant portion of capability in order to handle just the Colorado load. And if that is not enough, and I suspect it will be, we will have the ability to spill over into the rest of the system. So that's another infrastructure thing that we've done within the system itself to make sure that the 2 days next month go well. Additionally, last year, Commissioner Zimmerman, you asked about the contractual limits of the 60,000 users. I remember that question very well. We have tested up to about a 15-second page load, which is not too unreasonable, and the system now operates at about 100,000. So we are in excess of where we were last year, and I think in excess of what the actual load is going to be, but we'll see in a few weeks.
Right.
Okay. We talked a little bit about the fulfillment process. Seth actually did point out about what happened with the duplicates. We did have one batch that unfortunately was manually picked incorrectly and mailed. But the fulfillment process overall, as Seth mentioned, we mailed just over 204,000 licenses. There were those instances of duplicates. There were a couple of licenses that were returned to the state because there was no postage on them. A handful, literally a handful, and that's because the machine that does all these 204,000 envelopes actually two stuck together. That's what happened there. We've figured that out, and we're putting things in place to improve that. But the numbers we're talking about this year in terms of issues are in the double digits. As Devon pointed out earlier, last year they were in the 3 digits and moving up. So the quality of the fulfillment and the timeliness of the fulfillment was much, much better this year. And I want to put credit to Corey and Devon and John, who came down to our fulfillment center in Texas and helped us with the audit process, and were very useful in helping us to ensure that what we were trying to achieve was valid, modified, or updated to ensure that we got the best quality of license distributed as soon as we can. Any more? I can go into more specifics if you want, but I don't want to take too much time. But that I will emphasize that the quality of the distribution this year was dramatically different than last year.
Commissioner Bray.
Yeah, I think we've made great progress. I think this mobile app thing is something some of us on the commission at least wanted in the beginning. So I would sure like to expedite that as well as possible. We just attended a WAFA conference, and a lot of our sister states and organizations have that mobile app, and it seems like it's working pretty well for them. So, and I don't know who their vendors are. Don't have any idea, but that's something that's fairly important to us. And then it seems like every once in a while throughout the course of the year, there's an issue comes up, we need some data, and it creates a whole new act of Congress to get it. So hopefully we can continue to work on those issues.
Commissioner Bray, that's a good comment, and we're going to get better with the data retrieval. And related to the application, staff is going to start working on regulation to propose to the commission so we can move forward with that.
Commissioner Hauser.
Thanks, Madam Chair. At the risk of adding a wrinkle to it, I guess my question is there an opportunity to look at other apps or work that's been done by the state? Cotrex comes to mind. You know, pretty functional, relatively new, trails-oriented, app that I think a lot of outdoor rec users are using, and the state's put a lot of money into. So, if there's already a platform that, we could sort of Christmas tree onto that's already being utilized, I just wonder if that's part of the due diligence or the process that we could go through as well.
It's a good question. I'm going to leave this one up to Lauren. This one's out of my wheelhouse here.
Seth, if you want to take it, and I can at least...
Seth Rosenberg. Absolutely would be happy to look at it. I think the important thing for us is as we look at the framework of the app we've already built, which is going to have security. You're talking very, very high level personal information that needs to be protected, right down to social numbers, driver's licenses, et cetera. The Trails app may or may not have it. We'd have to look at the transactional ability of it, but we'll absolutely engage in that without a doubt.
There may be others, I don't know. Just that's the one that comes to mind.
Commissioners, Director Lauren Truitt, AD of Information and Education. Commissioner Hauser, thank you for the comment. One of my goals taking this branch in our business portion forward is looking at connectivity to other areas. We need to figure out how we centralize our ability to reach our customers, as well as bridge to new customers. So although there is a significant portion in the security realm that we need to make sure because of the level of data we have, that doesn't preclude us from really looking at areas of business that we haven't done before. And I think connectivity to those other apps, to other areas of Coloradans' lives is a very important position that we as an agency are going to look going forward. I think one of the other things as we look at the VRS, so the Vehicle Registration System, and some of the challenges that we've seen migrating that data, one of the areas that we will start looking at is data standardization, making sure that all of our systems are collecting similar data in the same way so that we can avoid some of those merge issues going forward, regardless of what system we're using, whether it's our volunteer database, our education database, law enforcement. We need to have a standardized way of collecting the customer information so that we can avoid some of these unintended ripple effects to our customers as well. So we will be working on those going forward. It's a priority of mine, and then being able to pull data. I'm a data nerd. I love to be able to analyze the business and see where we have areas of opportunity. So that is another area we will be addressing, and we'll be looking at our data and the analysis process of that very closely going forward as well. Thank you, Lauren. Any questions for Lauren Truitt? Commissioner McDaniel.
I'm not sure I have questions for Lauren, but maybe you could, I guess I do. One quick one is talking about the leftover licensing process and our leftover sale day. We're going to make quite an emphasis on communicating with our sportsmen prior to that day, which is more as important, if not more important, than what will happen on that day itself. So maybe you could give us some insight about that.
Absolutely. One of the areas that my team is working on right now is a communication strategy going into that day. We're looking at our web presence, social media channels, what kind of email or letter notification that we can pass out to our hunting public, making sure that they are aware of how to prepare for that day and be successful, what to expect. What we've done on our end, I think being able to be transparent of, we realize we've had challenges in the past, here's what we're doing going forward, here's how we are preparing as an agency to service our customers. Some of that forward communication, now, not everybody will always follow, here's what you need to have prepared, have your CID, have your driver's license, have your profile set up. But those are things that we want to be able to communicate to our customer to help them be successful in this process so that they know exactly what they're getting into, have their hunt codes or the licenses that they're selecting ready. Also making sure that they go through the purchase process. That is going to be a critical part of the communication. If you have a specific license that you're looking at, make sure you buy that first and then go back into the system and look at some other things. I know the Aspira team is also prepping on being able to change some of the system functionality from previous years, so we avoid some challenges in the purchasing process that we've seen in the past. So we're really looking at this from a holistic business perspective, but the communication, especially forward communication, is an area that we are honing in on very quickly. Commissioner McDaniel.
I just want to make a couple other comments. I mean, when Seth stood up a year ago, I think you've been an employee of Aspira for 8 days. And after that meeting, I'm not quite sure why he didn't quit. Because he certainly got an earful about where we stood. I do think as a commission, sometimes we don't, or as a group, we don't hear enough about the progress that's been made and where you stand today. I do personally have seen, if you look back at that application process from the year prior, and specifically the fulfillment process as well, those two things together that you referenced, Seth and Steve, there was virtually no noise this year. And when that happens, we don't talk about it very much because there wasn't much noise. We should be celebrating that there was no noise. So congratulations, Corey and Aspira, about doing that. In addition, adding the vehicle registration, the hunter registration, these other systems, we haven't been talking about those, so we just kind of don't think about these other things that we're integrating in this system that no other state is doing. That's quite an achievement by you all. Specifically, it was quite a goal by the state and our agency to do that. And I think about some of these other states, and I appreciate, when I was at WAFA, talking with the Kansas folks, they got one big game species in a pretty simple season. They're filling 24,000 licenses. We're filling 200,000 licenses. So we're a little bit more complicated, complex, and so I recognize that. That doesn't stop, though, the fact that our customers want more progress. And what I mean by that is specifically around the customer-facing things that they see, whether it be our website, whether it be the way we communicate with them, or whether it be applications. We can't take our foot off the gas. We've got to move right from integrating this, getting through our data corruption or inconsistency problems, and moving straight forward to the things that matter to them, which is how to fulfill that parks pass, how to buy that license, how to use an electronic tag, how to ensure that their data is accurate, and get through this leftover sale process, which I'll end my discussion with. We kind of make this problem, we did this to ourselves with this leftover sale. We're the only state that kind of does this. And we're going to have 50,000 people trying to get 1,000 licenses in the space of 15 minutes. It's going to be the biggest Amazon sale ever. But I applaud for what you've done and looked and spoken with Steve about, the technological improvements they've made to kind of get to weather this storm. I think we'll be able to weather it. And then, of course, next year, as Corey and I have spoken about, we won't have the same process. We'll have a secondary draw, and that will really eliminate this and make our customers much happier. I'm actually more happy about that virtually than, weathering this day in a couple weeks, but congratulations on that. And, again, don't take your foot off the gas. A lot more work to do.
Thank you, Commissioner McDaniels. And I think that's it's an important factor to remind our customers, when you have 40 or 50,000 people hitting a system in the span of about 30 seconds, the system it's a shock to the system's functionality. There will always be a lag. What our vendor has been working on and what OIT has been working on from the CPW side is to make sure that our load balancing, our systems on the back end can try and balance that out. There will be an impact, and it hopefully is less than 15-second page load times, but I think setting expectations and helping people understand, if you're trying to get a Garth Brooks ticket and you have 80,000 other people also trying to get that ticket when it opens, the system can't always host everybody hitting it at one time. And so those are some of the things that we will work on as a branch and for the agency, is setting those customer expectations, forward communication, and really helping the customer along that journey, making sure as we are a government entity, but we are also operating as a business, and really looking at that business and how we move forward progress to service the people of Colorado.
Thank you. Well said. Nice work, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the compliments. We appreciate it. We are not going to take our foot off the gas. We've still got a lot of work to do. And wish me luck in a few weeks, right? Thank you very much.
Good luck.
That's all I had, if there's no further questions.
Great. Thank you. Once again, I'm an hour behind. Big game season structure got me again. So I do want to hold the break, though. Let's be back here at 10:10, so we're going to have a 12-minute break. And we'll move forward with the Big Game Management Workshop Part 2.
I'm still can't believe I forgot.
The regular season, yeah, we added.
Thanks for the compliments for those guys.
If
she says something.
No.
I do think it was, again, important that we took action items this morning on big game season structure, so I appreciate the flexibility there. That said, we are a good hour behind. What I'm going to do is pull the agenda item 31, license suspension appeal, to now, because that individual does have a plane to catch, and then we'll move forward with big game workshop, and I'll talk a little more about that after we do the license hearing. So Steve Cooley, thank you.
Deputy Director Mock, Director Prenslow, Chairman Zimmerman, Chairwoman Zimmerman, I knew I was going to mess that up. Commissioners, good morning. I'm Steve Cooley, State Hearing Examiner for the Commission, appearing today on license suspension appeal in the case of Matthew Horton, case number 8567. Mr. Horton has requested a review of his initial suspension decision of 3 years and is represented today by his attorney, Jennifer Hayden, and Mr. Horton also appears in person. Before we get into the license suspension appeal itself, for the new commissioners, I wanted to take a minute and offer some background to the license suspension process in Colorado. Each wildlife violation in Colorado has a number of suspension points attached to the criminal penalty, in addition to the fine. For example, hunting and fishing trespass is a $200 fine and also carries an assessment of 20 license suspension points. A person may have their hunting and fishing privileges suspended following a conviction of violations of 20 or more suspension points. These violations may be standalone or in combination over a 5-year period. After a person has been convicted of these violations totaling 20 or more suspension points, the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Hearings Office will send that person a notice of hearing advising them of an opportunity to appear for their suspension hearing. However, it is not a mandatory appearance. As the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Hearings Examiner, I conduct these hearings where a person may present mitigating evidence and other testimony in their case before I issue a written notice of suspension. I make these suspension decisions using 17 factors listed in regulations as a guide in combination with the facts and circumstances of each case. For the majority of wildlife violations, a person can be suspended for up to 5 years. However, for more serious violations, a person may receive up to a lifetime suspension. If a person disagrees with how the hearing examiner has reached their suspension decision, they may then appeal the initial suspension decision to the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission, and then going to District Court, Court of Appeals, and so on. The Commission has the exclusive authority to suspend wildlife privileges in Colorado, and the Commission can delegate this authority to an appointed hearing examiner. For reference, the Hearings Office issued over 500 suspension decisions in 2018, and of those, approximately 17 were appealed to the Commission. No cases were appealed further than the Commission. Are there any questions on the suspension process? Okay, we'll move right into Mr. Horton's license suspension appeal. First, I'll provide a brief summary of Mr. Horton's case, then Ms. Hayden will give her arguments, and I'll follow with a response. The background of Mr. Horton's case: as a result of an investigation into the illegal guiding and hunting activities of Andrew Pashley, wildlife officers became aware that in January of 2017, Matthew Horton paid Andrew Pashley $3,000 cash for a bobcat and mountain lion hunt. Several days later, Andrew Pashley obtained permission to hunt 2 mountain lions that had been on a small parcel of land in Evergreen, Colorado, belonging to David Stubbs. Pashley called Horton, told Horton to drive up from Denver and meet him at the Stubbs property. Pashley then turned his hounds loose on 2 mountain lion tracks without Horton being present to participate in the hunt. Pashley and his hounds trailed the mountain lions across Stubbs' 5 acres and onto an adjoining property of 3.5 acres, which he did not have permission to enter or hunt on, where the mountain lion ended up treeing. Horton arrived at the Stubbs property approximately 30 minutes later and followed Pashley's tracks in the snow to where the mountain lion was being held in the tree. In Colorado, a hunter is required to participate when a hunter is required to be present, when the hounds are released on a track and must continually participate in the mountain lion hunt. When Mr. Horton arrived at the tree where the lion was being held, he shot the lion with bow and arrow. The lion jumped out of the tree and ran onto another landowner's 5.5 acre property where it died and was recovered by Horton and Pashley. They did not have permission to enter either of the properties where the mountain lion was shot or recovered. In Colorado, a hunter is required to have permission from the landowner to enter upon private land to hunt wildlife or recover wildlife, and private land is not required to be signed, fenced, or posted to notify a sportsman of the ownership status. After the mountain lion was killed, Pashley and Horton discussed that Horton needed to have the mountain lion checked by CPWS staff for a mandatory inspection. Pashley told Horton not to tell anyone that the hunt had been paid for or outfitted. And when Horton presented the mountain lion to Colorado Parks and Wildlife for the mandatory inspection, he lied to CPW staff and told them he had not paid any money for the hunt and it was not outfitted. Later, as the investigation progressed and officers interviewed Horton, he again lied and told investigating officers on the hunt that on the hunt with Pashley, it was not outfitted and he had not paid any money. Mr. Horton also told officers that he was aware that he needed to be present for the entire mountain lion hunt, but initially told officers that he had been there when the hounds were released for the hunt. Mr. Horton would later admit that he was aware of these violations and that he had knowingly lied during the investigation. Mr. Horton's mountain lion hunt, or mountain lion, was illegal because it was taken on private land without permission and because he had killed the mountain lion when he had not been present when the hounds were released. In a plea agreement, Horton pled guilty to 3 separate charges: hunting on private land without permission, not being present when the dogs were released on a mountain lion hunt, and then finally the illegal possession of a mountain lion. The court sentenced Horton to probation for 1 year and ordered him to pay a fine of $1,975.50. Mr. Horton also entered into an agreement where he would provide truthful testimony against Mr. Pashley. Mr. Horton's agreement also included a factual summary of the case, which he signed under oath as being true and correct. Mr. Horton's plea agreement also resulted in 40 license suspension points being assessed against his privilege, whereby he could be suspended for up to 5 years. Mr. Horton appears in person today for his license suspension hearing with counsel, or appeared in person for his license suspension hearing with counsel, and after considering the facts of the case as they related to the suspension factors listed in commission regulation and the mitigation offered by Mr. Horton, I issued an initial written decision of 3 years. Mr. Horton has now appealed that decision to the commission. Ms. Hayden?
If I could.
Commissioner Garcia.
Before council begins, I need to disclose, as part of my career in the practice of law, over many, many years, I have mentored many, many attorneys. And I need to disclose that Jennifer Hayden, counsel for the appellate, is one of those mentees. And she has been a mentee of mine for many, many years. And we still work together regularly. I spoke with Jake Matter, our counsel. It is not a conflict. I believe that I can still be fair and impartial, but I need to disclose that, and if anyone on the commission feels that I should step aside, I would gladly do so. I need to disclose that.
Any concerns? Okay, thank you, Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. And for the record, I did speak with counsel and provided notice of the same. Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Standing with me today is Mr. Horton. This is
I apologize. Do you mind speaking close to the mic? We have folks that listen into the live stream.
people who aren't present here today?
That's
Okay,
correct. Yeah,
got
we
it.
do live stream.
Is this better?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer Hayden, on behalf of Mr. Horton, who's present this morning. As Mr. Cooley stated earlier, this is a case that Mr. Horton became involved in as part of an overriding investigation of an Andrew Pashley. Andrew Pashley was separately charged, and that case took its course. But part of Mr. Pashley's wrongdoing was holding himself out to be a registered outfitter. He went beyond that to allege that he was involved and worked for and coordinated with the Colorado Parks and Wildlife. He made connections through his fraudulent statements with landowners, who then would give him permission to come and hunt on their land. It was through the investigation into Mr. Pashley that there was this hunt that came up that Mr. Horton had paid Mr. Pashley for his guiding services. Mr. Horton is not an experienced mountain lion hunter. This was his first hunt. He sought the expertise, he sought the guiding services, the outfitting services from someone who held himself out to be a professional in this area. Mr. Horton did receive a call from Mr. Pashley after he had received permission from a landowner to come and hunt 2 lions that were in a tree on the landowner's property. Mr. Horton accepted that invitation, went to the scene. He believed that Mr. Pashley was there with his dogs to go on a mountain lion hunt. Upon arriving, Mr. Horton was met by the landowner, who greeted him and said, "Come on, let's go. They're right over here." Mr. Horton grabbed his bow, went running with the landowner to the spot where Mr. Pashley and the dogs had a treed mountain lion, about 200 yards from the house. The landowner was present. Mr. Horton was then instructed, if you want to take the shot, you can take the shot. Mr. Horton did take that shot, and he harvested that mountain lion. Between that time where the landowner said that this is my property, that's my tree, that mountain lion did go a further distance. The landowner was with them. There was no intent or knowledge that Mr. Horton had ever strayed from the spot where he believed he had permission to hunt, where he had a professional guide that was saying you can take this shot, and he did take that shot. At no time did he believe that he was trespassing. There was an interview with the homeowner during the course of this investigation, Mr. Stubbs, the landowner of this property, who had testified that I believe that we were on my property, and I had said that. And I feel really bad for Mr. Horton. Mr. Stubbs was unaware that Mr. Pashley was not involved with CPW. He was not aware that Mr. Pashley has never been a licensed outfitter, was never registered to guide, and he was out here conducting these fraudulent businesses to the extent where he had even allegedly created these fraudulent documents to support his outfitting services. Mr. Horton was duped into taking this hunt, thought he was assisting a professional guide doing something beyond his work hours, that he was going to pay him for his services, that he was doing this as his separate business apart from his outfitter. That's where the exchange of funds came in, and Mr. Horton did not know that this transaction was illegal. He followed the rules, the regulations, that upon harvesting this mountain lion, he went, had it checked in with the Colorado Parks and Wildlife, explained the situation. He was hunting with a buddy. This was the situation. And then followed the rules and the procedures set forth to have that hide checked. That's when the follow-up to that was the Colorado Parks and Wildlife showing up at Mr. Horton's house investigating a trespassing case. And Mr. Horton said, no, that's not correct. I was with a professional guide that I paid for services. I was with the landowner, and I had permission to hunt on this property. I had a license to hunt mountain lion. Why are you here? And it wasn't until officers said, there was a much further investigation that you have found yourself wrapped up in, and this is what led us to your house. Mr. Horton, upon finding that information, wanted to do whatever he could to assist in the investigation against Mr. Pashley. He handed over his cell phone. He made statements. He said, I will give you any information you need to stop that man from doing what he's doing. I don't want anybody else to be taken advantage of. I don't want animals that belong to the people of Colorado to be harvested in this way in an illegal manner. So he entered into a cooperation agreement with the district attorney's office to agree to testify against what took place against Mr. Pashley. Mr. Horton took all of the steps that he could to not only remedy this situation, he took responsibility for the actions that he could have corrected. It wasn't until later during this investigation where he had a moment to step back, investigators informed him, here's the situation, that he said, you're right, I wasn't present when those dogs were released. I thought they had just been released. That is something I have reflected upon. I've learned from that. Mr. Pashley was not known to Mr. Horton prior to this incident. He was referred by a coworker that said, hey, this is a professional guide who provides these services. There is, in any suspension case, there is an underlying case that takes place. And that's where Mr. Horton agreed to assist. But his agreement and level of cooperation did not stop there. Not only did he agree to testify against that co-defendant, but he has taken steps as part of his probationary sentence to further aid and assist the Colorado Parks and Wildlife with their mission. Mr. Horton does not want others to find themselves inadvertently in a position standing before you all today, presenting information on a terrible situation that he found himself in. In working with Colorado Parks and Wildlife as a volunteer, from the conclusion of the Jefferson case, Mr. Horton has spent time trying to assist Colorado Parks and Wildlife and tell his story to friends, co-workers, colleagues. Hey folks, you really need to check out who you engage to go hunting with. There is a system to check to see if somebody really is a registered outfitter. And I encourage you to go to the Department of Regulatory Agencies and check these folks out. You can't just rely on their word. Mr. Horton is trying to make further amends by continuing to volunteer with the Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And he has a statement and information that he will share with you all to further explain the work that he is doing with them. Mr. Horton has been prohibited from hunting because of the underlying case. And he is not hunting. And he is in full compliance with that court order. So prior to a Colorado Parks and Wildlife suspension, Mr. Horton has been prohibited from hunting. And he willingly has given that up. So not only is there a 3-year suspension imposed by the state, he also has a underlying case that prevents him from doing so, that he has fully cooperated and complied with. There are other collateral consequences that Mr. Horton has suffered from finding himself duped by Mr. Pashley. As part of Mr. Horton's employment, he is a videographer that goes out, videotapes, and makes video photographs of outdoor nature scenes, outdoor animals, because he has a respect for the environment, respect for our natural resources, and he's lost employment because of this, because of being a victim of Mr. Pashley, as the Colorado Parks and Wildlife was also a victim of Mr. Pashley. And so Mr. Horton has suffered more in this case for being a victim of Mr. Pashley. But beyond that, he stands before you today requesting the commission to reconsider the decision in this case, that a 3-year suspension sentence is not warranted based on the mitigation provided in the packet submitted to the commission prior to today's hearing, based on additional information presented today, based on Mr. Horton's full cooperation with law enforcement upon being informed what the situation was, the copy of the agreement to testify against Mr. Pashley has been included in your information, and his further ongoing efforts to correct the situation and educate others to not find themselves in a similar situation. We would respectfully request the commission to consider that and either not impose a suspension sentence or reduce the 3 years. And Mr. Horton does have additional information on the matter, or a statement.
Thank you. Mr. Horton?
Good morning, and thank you for the time to speak with you today. I humbly stand before you today as a passionate sportsman and avid outdoorsman. In my years of being a conservationist, I've learned 2 things: respect and responsibility. Respect for the land and the animals, and responsibility for the law and good stewardship towards others, hunters and non-hunters alike. Being in this situation is no easy pill to swallow, and it has kept me up many nights wishing I could have done things differently, but also understanding the responsibility I have moving forward by telling others my story in hopes it doesn't happen to them, and also taking responsibility for the naivety of my actions. As you can imagine, pursuing a mountain lion is an incredible rush and an honor, just like any other game. Little did I know that my dream would soon turn into a nightmare. Fast forward to the present, and I have done everything in my power to make things right. I have cooperated with Colorado Parks and Wildlife and sign an agreement to testify against Mr. Pashley. I am very discouraged that an individual that guides as a profession would mislead me in the way he did by releasing his hounds early without my knowledge and also holding the lion at bay. These actions are illegal, and his blatant disregard for the law is very upsetting to me. After arriving, I was met with Mr. Stubbs, the landowner. I introduced myself in a cordial manner, and he informed me that Mr. Pashley had already released the hounds, and they were in pursuit of the lions. I do acknowledge that once I arrived and I noticed the hounds were already released, I should have reflected back on the mountain lion test I had taken several weeks before and realized I should have not continued. However, I let my adrenaline and race against legal shooting light cloud my judgment. Following the tracks and sounds of the hounds, I did not cross any fences, go through any gates, or see any private property signs or any no trespassing signs. Little did I know that I had trespassed onto another property. I later found that out from Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Unfortunately, I am now here in front of you as a man that is extremely sorry for the loss of an animal and the resources wasted. I have told my story to numerous individuals in the hunting community. No matter what embarrassment or resentment I would receive, I want my experience told so others can learn from my mistake. I have volunteered almost 40 hours with Colorado Parks and Wildlife for wildlife transport across the Northeast region, driving around 300 miles transporting injured animals to rehabilitation facilities, as well as 2 days at Steamboat Springs Lake doing wildlife monitoring. I have also requested to volunteer for the Northeast Region Hunting and Angling Youth Outreach Program with Mr. Brian Posthumus. Excuse me if I mispronounced that. And just waiting for more information on the training for that. I have also been in touch with Melissa Neal for the Northeast Hunter Education Program. I would love the opportunity to tell my story to others so that they don't make the same mistake I did. If I could go back, there are things I would definitely do differently. For one, I would have asked for an outfitter number and learned the difference between a guide and an outfitter. Secondly, I would have refreshed the laws, questions on the line test. Third, I would have slowed things down when I arrived on scene and not let my adrenaline and excitement get the best of me. Fourth, I would have asked the landowner for clarification and verification of property boundaries, even if they are with me. Lastly, if things seemed out of place, I would have stopped the hunt right there to distinguish wrong from right. But I humbly request you to take into consideration the time I have already taken. I have already been suspended via my probation, which has restricted me from any hunting, carrying a firearm, or being on the property where hunting is knowingly taking place, as well as my volunteering trying to make things right and to make a difference in at least one other person's decision. You have my word that I will be more diligent in learning and remembering hunting laws and will continue to aid Colorado Parks and Wildlife in any way possible to catch other road guides that are profiting illegally. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horton. Any questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Bray.
Yeah, thank you. You alluded that you did previously take the mountain lion test prior to getting a mountain lion license.
Yes, in order to hunt a mountain lion in the state of Colorado, there is a required test to take, and Mr. Horton did take and comply and pass that test.
And I guess this question would be for Mr. Cooley. If this suspension is withheld, when does it start?
If the suspension were upheld today, the suspension would begin today.
Additional questions? I have a question. I think this is for Mr. Cooley. It's a 3-year suspension. This occurred in 2017, January of 2017.
That is correct.
So the suspension didn't start in 2017? I think you've explained this to us before, and I can't recall how it works.
A person is not even noticed for a suspension hearing until after they've been convicted. So he was charged. The case went to court where he reached a plea agreement with the court. Following that, because of the number of suspension points that were assessed, the law enforcement unit of Colorado Parks and Wildlife forwarded that to the hearings office. We noticed him to a suspension hearing. And so yes, the wheels move slowly, but they do move.
So effectively, if it is upheld today, it would realistically be 5 years?
No, the suspension has been held in abeyance. He was not suspended. Even when he was issued the 40 license suspension points, a person is not actually suspended until they've been to a hearing, are issued the suspension, and have chosen to not appeal that decision. So currently, Mr. Horton is not suspended. His suspension is being held in abeyance pending the outcome of this appeal.
Okay. Commissioner Garcia.
Can I add to that? Ms. Hayden, if you could help, if you would explain how the probation worked when it was imposed and why his license was revoked by the court and why he's been unable to hunt since that time. And I'd like to also know what the conditions of his probation were, or maybe still are, whether or not he's completed them, and if there's still remaining probation. I'd like to know more about the probationary period.
Yes, and I think that this will add to Ms. Zimmerman's question. In the underlying criminal case within Jefferson County, a disposition was reached. That case ended in October of 2018. In October of 2018, as part of the resolution of that case, Mr. Horton was placed on 1 year of probation. The terms and conditions of probation prevent him from being in possession of a firearm, for being in possession of ammunition, and prevent him from hunting. And so as part of the underlying case, Mr. Horton is currently fulfilling that sentence, is prohibited from hunting, and has not hunted since the inception of this case, since the conclusion of the Jefferson County case in October of 2018, which is set to then close the end of October 2019. So he is prohibited from currently hunting and is in compliance with that request. Does that completely answer the question?
I'm still unclear. Why was he prohibited from hunting from the inception of this case until the courts placed him on probation?
Mr. Horton chose not to hunt. An individual has the privilege to hunt and fish in the state of Colorado up and until that privilege has been suspended for one reason or another. If a person accrues 20 points or more in any first suspensions, they'll receive an opportunity to be heard. There's also a predating criminal case to address those charges. In addressing those criminal charges, a court can order as a term and condition of probation, if they're imposing probation, that a person not hunt. And so that's what's taken place in this case. When Mr. Horton resolved the underlying criminal case with Jefferson County for his actions and took responsibility for his wrongdoing in this case, he was placed on a year of probation in October of 2018, preventing him from carrying a weapon. Although he has a right to carry concealed, he has that permit and license. This court order prevents him from doing so. It also prevents him from hunting. So he could not hunt between October 2018 and October 2019. That is in full effect and force to date.
Thank you. Commissioner Haskett.
I'm concerned that he lied to start with. He knowingly lied about hiring an outfitter. He didn't follow the rules on the mountain lion test. And you didn't accept responsibility until afterwards. I think you're lucky to get 3 years. I would make a motion that we do uphold the 3 years, but starting October of 18.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Haskett, second by Commissioner Adams. Further discussion?
Just so I'm clear,
Commissioner Bray.
The suspension would start with the suspension he's currently under. So 18 to 19 would be year one.
1920 would be year two. 1920 to 21 would be year three. Is that, Commissioner Haskett, is that accurate? Okay, further discussion, or should I call the roll? Commissioner McDaniel.
Mr. Cooley, you were going to respond to the comments. Did you have any response with regards to either statements made by Mr. Horton or the attorney?
Thank you for that opportunity, Steve Cooley. What I would say is kind of what has been brought up already. The cooperation, I would not say, was completely voluntary when the officers arrived to interview him after he checked into Mountain Lion. He did lie repeatedly during that interview. Yes, the cell phone was given over voluntarily. However, it would have been taken as a result of a search warrant. I think Mr. Horton was given the opportunity at that point to cooperate. He did choose to turn it over instead of having it looked at under a search warrant. I think the rest of the issues that I would have addressed in a rebuttal here have been addressed. I just wanted to make it clear, however, that Mr. Horton made decisions that were independent of Andrew Pashley's violations. The charges, any charges that Mr. Horton faced in regards to hiring an illegal outfitter or taking wildlife under an illegally outfitted hunt were dismissed. This is unproven conduct. This is not, it is part of the underlying case. You cannot discuss this case without telling the whole story. However, his suspension decision reflects the fact that those charges were dismissed and their unproven conduct.
Thank you, Mr. Cooley.
May we take an opportunity to respond to Ms. Haskett's concerns?
We do have a motion on the floor. Can we continue to have discussion? Jake?
Yes.
Okay, please go ahead.
Ms. Haskett, in response to your concerns, what began, Mr. Horton was not aware that he was the subject of an investigation. He believed that when Mr. Pashley said, hey, don't tell anyone that you paid me, that he was working, for his own business on the side, and he was trying to assist Mr. Pashley with that side business, not to circumvent or try to avoid the Colorado Parks and Wildlife investigation. It was, hey, I'm trying to help this guy out who's doing this job on the side, so no, I didn't pay him because that's what he thought the investigation was about. And so it was trying to assist Mr. Pashley with making money that he had earned beyond his employer, which it wasn't the case. Mr. Pashley was not employed as an outfitter. And it wasn't until Colorado Parks and Wildlife, when, in speaking with Mr. Horton, he realized this is not the issue. They received full cooperation. The Colorado Parks and Wildlife in their reports thanked Mr. Mr. Horton for his cooperation, as stated and cited in the brief that you have been previously submitted. So that is in regards to speaking with law enforcement. Then, Mr. Horton did take responsibility and accountability in the underlying criminal case and did enter pleas to his poor choices and his conduct, that he, upon reflection, wished he hadn't made those choices, but he did take responsibility and address those matters with the criminal courts.
Thank you, Ms. Hayden. And I think, I agree with Commissioner Haskett. I think you've done a great job presenting the case. This is as you know, we typically don't necessarily, give a whole lot of leeway. So I think this is a great motion. Still, a 3-year suspension, I agree, you're lucky, So I think I'd like to go ahead and take a roll call vote. Oh, Commissioner Hauser.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just in advance, I'll vote no. I don't believe it's stringent enough and should begin at the conclusion of this deliberation.
Thank you. Laura, let's call the roll.
Adams?
Yes.
Lecca?
Yes.
Bray?
Yes.
Garcia?
Yes.
Haskett?
Yes.
Hauser?
No.
McDaniel?
Yes.
Schaefer?
Yes.
Marty?
Yes.
Vigil?
Yes.
Chair Zimmerman?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Chair Zimmerman, thank you for the flexibility of allowing this to occur a little bit early so she could get out of town. I do appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so trying to do some schedule management here. I just want to talk briefly about the big game management workshop. This is something that staff puts an incredible amount of time and resource effort into, and it's something that's very important, I think, for this commission. The more information we have, the broader understanding we have of these concepts around big game management, as well as, parks passes and all the other things we've talked about, the better prepared we are to make the best decisions. So I will continue to work with staff to make sure that we do cover all of the materials in the big game management. That said, yeah, I got that. That said, we do have folks from the public who that are on a schedule here, and I think, as we've talked about during the meetings, we need to be definitely handing action and meeting business. So what I want to do is I want to jump to items 32, 33, and 34, and then we may need to push item 35, and then we're going to get through as much of the big game management material as we can, and we're going to talk about how to make sure that we continue to cover all that material in the coming weeks. So if possible, if Garrett Watson is available to present the game damage claim denial. Mr. Watson? Is that okay to bump you forward a little bit? Yes. Okay, thank you. Is that okay?
You ready?
Yes, thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. Director Prenslow. Garrett Watson, Game Damage Commercial Parks Manager. I'm here to present to you game damage claim number 07-Y19-28 by claimant Tony Elkins, who is claiming damage to growing hay crops caused by both deer and elk. This particular claim started February 13 of 2018 and lasted until October 31st of 2018. There have been similar claims going back several years. These claims continue to have more moving parts and complexity in regards to their eligibility under the statute and regulations. CPW staff has increased concerns with the claimant's lack of duty to mitigate the damage and to exhaust all methods of mitigations offered but often declined by the claimant. These mitigation efforts include game damage hunts, kill permits, and even assistance with help through the local Habitat Partnership Committee. To further compound the complexity of eligibility for a claim, the claimant leases his land where the damage occurs to an outfitter who makes money in the amount over the limitation to be eligible for game damage claims. CPW staff has worked with the claimant in the past on claims, but the lines of gray have become more black and white in regards to their eligibility for a claim by statute and regulations. So with that, our staff has recommended denial for this claim based on statute 33-3103G and regulation number 1706 that govern hunting access fee limitations. This statute and regulations state that the state of Colorado is not liable and a damage claim will be denied when a fee in excess of $500 per season has been charged any person for big game hunting access onto or through any lands owned, leased, or otherwise controlled by the claimant. In this case, a local outfitter, Joe Keys of Keys Guide and Outfitting Service, manages all hunting that occurs on this property. Mr. Keys' website advertises a charge of $6,750 per one-on-one service or $5,200 per person for a two-on-one guide service. In fact, the claimant's letter to the commission states that the outfitter took 29 paid hunters in 2018, as well as some non-paying hunters. The claimant has not provided any documentation to show that a fee in excess of $500 per season has not been charged to any person for big game hunting access onto or through the lands that he owns, controls via written lease or otherwise. The second reason for the denial by staff was under regulation number 1710, which is the duty to mitigate damage. This states that the doctrine of avoidable consequences applies to wildlife damages claims, and claimants have the duty to mitigate those damages. It further states that a claim shall be denied or limited as appropriate under the doctrine where the claimant fails to exercise reasonable care and diligence to avoid the loss or to minimize or lessen the resulting damage. In this case, District Wildlife Manager Michael Blanc encouraged the use of hunting as a method of dispersing deer and elk and reducing the game damage and has so for years. DWM Michael Blanc has continued to ask the claimant to increase the amount of antlerless hunting that occurs on the property to help disperse the animals to hunters on neighboring properties, but the claimant is not willing to do so due to the outfitter lease. DWM Michael Blanc offered and the claimant declined both game damage hunts and kill permits to alleviate excessive damage during the growing season when most of the damage occurs and outside of the normal hunting season. The claimant admits that the use of the hunts would negatively impact the outfitter's operation. The claimant has also been encouraged and offered help in going to CPW's local Habitat Partnership program by our staff for projects to offset losses to hay from big game wildlife. This program was created to help landowners with conflicts with big game for things such as fence and forage damage. Another benefit to our Habitat Partnership program is that landowners who are not eligible for game damage claims can still participate in this program to help with their damages. This helps to not blur the lines of eligibility for game damage claims, but also helps CPW effectively help those who have legitimate conflicts with big game wildlife on their agricultural operations. So there is a history of claims going back several years with the claimant and his eligibility. I have District Wildlife Manager Michael Blanc here if you guys would like some more information regarding that history, or if there's any other questions that I or Michael Blanc could help answer for you.
Thank you, Garrett. Commissioner McDaniel.
Sorry if I didn't catch that. I'm still a little confused on the written material versus what you just said. Could you give me a little more insight about the thoughts here from the landowner with regards to the inconsistency of the policy being paid in the past and not being paid in 18? That there was, as his words, change in the rules. Can you give me a little insight about, or reflect on that, please?
I could do so. It might be better coming from District Wildlife Manager Michael Blanc, who's kind of had the long history with the claimant.
Thank you, Michael Blanc, District Wildlife Manager in Plateau Valley up there. Yeah, to address your question, I've worked with them since 2009, trying to achieve what would be a palatable situation for CPW and for the Elkins as well. And it's been my goal. I mean, I knew that we weren't there when we first started. We had a game damage situation, and achieving more mitigation, more hunting was desirable from my point of view. From theirs, not as much, but they were cooperative. Hunting wasn't real appealing to them, and I can respect that. They did get an outfitter in, I believe, 2011 is when I was aware of it. And I thought, well, maybe we can make this work. More hunts were occurring at that point, antlerless hunts. They were sponsoring damage hunts. They were sponsoring veteran hunts, youth hunts, things like that. That has kind of morphed through the years, not towards the direction I would like to go, maybe further away from what I would like it to be. And that's kind of what has brought us here today. I would have liked to see more mitigation occurring during the growing season when those animals that are causing the problem are actually causing the problem, instead of late in the season when those animals are probably diluted with other migration that occurs onto that property. Does that make sense?
Could you clarify for me then, we have consistently paid claims in the past? I kind of read that they'd received funds in the past. Did I read that wrong, that they did not get game damage claims in the past or not?
I think they have. Yeah.
I thought they had.
Yeah, go ahead.
We have had annual claims with Elkins since at least 2009. Don't quote me on that number. There was a leasee prior to that I also had claims with. So approximately 2009, we've had an annual game damage claim with the Elkins, and it would be 2018 that this has come up for the denial.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Bray.
Is this property enrolled in the landowner voucher program?
Yes, sir.
It is. So this landowner receives vouchers?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Commissioner Bray, what was the last question?
The landowner receives vouchers.
Thank you.
Okay. So is there a motion to uphold staff recommendation of the denial of this claim? Commissioner Behill?
There is.
By Commissioner Behill. I like the leading. In a second? Second. Commissioner Schaefer. Looks like we can probably do this by a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners, for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, let's welcome Robin Cascade, Great Old Broads for Wilderness.
I'm trying to get my wife to join.
Thank you, Robin. Welcome, and thank you for spending the time with us.
Yeah, thank you all for having us, and I appreciate the opportunity to address you today. My name is Robin Cascade, and I'm a representative of Great Old Broads for Wilderness, a nonprofit organization, national office based in Durango, and I am the leader of the local area chapter that includes San Miguel County, where you sit today, Ouray County, Montrose County. And let's see, I think I can work this. Do I need to point any place in particular?
Hit this.
So I have the arrow, isn't that what I'm supposed to be using? There we go, great. So you can read our mission. I'm an elementary educator. I hate it when people read the slide, because I know you're literate. So our mission statement is there. Basically, we work on behalf of wildlands and wilderness. We have 3 tenets: keeping wildlands wild and the Wilderness Act intact, keeping public lands in public hands, both federal and state, and also making public lands part of the climate change solution rather than part of the problem. And you may know that if we were to combine state and federal public lands in the U.S., they are 25% of the global gas emissions contribution to climate. And if we combined those lands in our country and called them a nation, we would be ranked as the 6th polluting nation in the world, above Brazil and Germany. So it's fairly significant. We do our work across 17 states with 40 chapters that we call broadbands. And we do that really in 3 ways: with education and outreach. And some of you have met Chris Shaver, who is tabling there in the slide on the top left. And we also do public presentations. For example, we brought Dr. Chuck Anderson to Ridgway to talk about his mule deer study year before last. We also are boots on the ground, so we do stewardship projects. Our broadband is currently involved with the raptor monitoring at Ridgway State Park. We're very proud to be part of that statewide project. And 2 years ago, this is a photo from our Colorado Public Lands Day stewardship project where we did some trail cleaning up. We also solitude monitor for the wilderness program for the U.S. Forest Service, and our broadbands do a bunch of different kind of stewardship projects like that. Sherry Shank on the top right is is demonstrating their advocacy, which is another component of what we do at Great Old Broads, and we always do it with fun, so I like to put that picture in there. We're known for our humor. But I'd like to back up in terms of advocacy. It's why I'm here today. We'd like to talk to you about our concern for wildlife habitat fragmentation across the state. And typically our chapters operate independently. We pick our own projects. And this one, wildlife habitat fragmentation, has become so important to all our chapters, 10 chapters in the state of Colorado, that we have banded together to form kind of a coalition, a team, a task force, if you will. And we've been meeting for about a year. And we have met with commissioners, we have met with staff in the different offices to get educated about the issue. And I'd like to share with you the next series of slides. There's actually 2 different series. The first is about the change in trail proliferation over time. So this is Nederland area. You can see the colors. Teal is elk migration corridors. Purple is elk winter range. And I just am going to go through these quickly because in some ways the impact is greater as you move. So this is 1998, adding trails 10 years later, and then specifically when another decade up into the current time almost, you can see how dramatic that increase is. These are GIS folks at Rocky Mountain Wild prepared these maps. The next series is static in time, but showing the overlay of different uses that fragment the habitat. So this is just our major highways. And again, the blue-purple is elk summer concentration, pink being critical winter range, and the green being production area. So we have our major highways here. You can see Glenwood Springs in the top left, Carbondale and Basalt kind of mid-screen. And then we add city-county neighborhood roads, and then move on with BLM and Forest Service roads. And these are actually legal open roads. These are not decommissioned roads. And motorized trails adds a bunch. And then when we add our biking and hiking routes, we see that those critical habitats are pretty riddled with trails. So that's why we're here today to talk to you about that. And particularly, we have some asks. And the first slide is kind of big picture, so that we're looking at that we ask, and I know staff try and do this, and we're bringing this to you as the policy entity, that you will see our concern as an organization out there in the public representing our members, that they consider large landscape level cumulative impacts to wildlife in any kind of analysis. We know that we operate sometimes project by project, and what we find is that really doesn't give you the big picture over time for what will be sustainable for the population. We also know that if we prioritize our state's natural resources and wild unfragmented habitats, we're not just talking about benefits to wildlife, but we're talking about benefits in terms of watershed protection, pollinators, forest health, carbon sequestration, all these different things that come with those large unfragmented habitats. And then finally, in the big picture, always utilizing the best available scientific data. And I just want to thank all the staff that are here, because I know that you do that to the best of your ability. We've been involved with the GMUG Forest Revision Plan, and we sometimes find that the data sets that they're using don't reflect what those of us who hang out in the public lands, we're fortunate enough to have time to do that, what we see on the ground. And so I know that you use the best available data that you have, but we would ask that you count on folks like us, nonprofit organizations, recreational users who are out on the landscape and can tell you where we see the calving grounds for elk and deer and so on and so forth. The next slide is some of our asks that are very specific. And so we ask that staff be involved in developing a comprehensive risk assessment model. You know much better than I do what that looks like, but the idea being that we're looking again at big picture, long-term, that we can anticipate impacts rather than react to what's happening on the landscape. In conjunction with that we look at constructing suitability maps based on the best available science and knowledge from on the ground and wildlife needs, and that those maps be updated regularly, that they not be this document that sits on the shelf or sits in the computer, but they really be live documents. And I just learned recently about a project that's joint between CPW and Colorado Natural Heritage Program called CERT, Colorado Conservation Environmental Review Tool. Are you folks familiar with that? Because a lot of people I've spoken with aren't.
I think I've heard of it.
Yeah.
I think I've heard it mentioned, but yeah.
So basically, it's a GIS tool to quantify impacts on wildlife. So that may be part of what, that may be a tool that we can use to achieve some of these goals. And then finally, in this specific goal is, if the science is unclear, we ask that you protect the resource, that you err on the side of doing no harm if we don't know about the negative impacts. There's a lot of talk these days amongst federal agencies in particular about adaptive management. And although I understand the need for that kind of flexibility, what I also recognize is adaptive management means that the damage happens to the resource and then we mitigate it. And we would love to see CPW take the lead in being proactive rather than reactive. Finally, and Craig's going to speak to this in much more detail, but Great Old Broads would like to ask a couple of things about the State Trails Grant. And we're just delighted with the work that has happened really in the last week or so. And Fletcher, I assume you're close by, and Fletcher shared with us beforehand. So I had to submit this PowerPoint before we got the revised draft of the grant criteria. But let's just go here, since it's already here, and we would like to keep seeing this go in this direction. So give greater weight to wildlife needs in the State Trails Grant criteria. That has been, you'll hear about that soon. We would like to see even more, but we know that steps are being taken in that direction. We're very grateful. One that we feel really strongly about is this defining the expectation and perhaps even a protocol of what it means for an applicant to consult with CPW wildlife managers. There's a box to check on the grant application, but it's not really clear what that entails, what is required of the applicant, and we would love to see that spelled out more clearly. Because sometimes when I call wildlife managers to say, do you know about this grant proposal? They'll say, no, that hasn't come through our office. It might be another wildlife manager who's dealt with that. And I just feel like it needs to be more robust. Ensure that the public has input on the trail grant process earlier. It seems like, and this may be my own naivete in learning about CPW and the process, but it's not announced in the way that like Forest Service plans are announced and that kind of thing. We have to really dig deep on the CPW website to find out when the trails meetings are happening, what the applications are that have been submitted, all those kind of things. So however we can get involved in that, we would love it. And then finally, prioritizing maintenance and education in the granting process. Because of that strong feeling about penetrating deeper into the environment and pristine areas, we would like to see more emphasis put on maintaining current trails, educating, already maybe constructing trails where trails already are, where in some ways the damage is already done, if you will, so that we don't keep seeing further and further. And one of the things I always say to people is I recreate in a lot of different ways, and I like to ride my mountain bike, but it might be that some of us has to ride the same trail twice. We need to do a loop twice to get our 25 miles or something instead of going further and further and into riparian areas. And it's a hard statement to make, and I have made it in public before at county commissioner meetings and in other places, that we need to start looking at the intrinsic value of wild lands and wild places, and that humans are not the only important species on the planet. And I have been yelled at in public meetings when I make that statement. But it's really important to us as an organization and to me personally. And so I just like to kind of add that as justification for why we feel strongly about this. And if you have the opportunity as individuals or as a commission and staff to support some of the large land protection initiatives that are happening right now in our state, for example, the CORE Act, Colorado Outdoor Recreation and Economy Act, or under the GMUG Forest Plan revision, we're involved with like 15 other conservation coalition members in proposing what we're calling the community conservation proposal that looks at large areas of landscape that continue to need proposal. And so my time is up, but I just want to say thank you, and we appreciate your time and consideration of our comments.
Thank you, Robin. Commissioner Garcia.
The last slide, I want to thank you for including young men like myself in the old Broads organization. Yes. But if you would go back real quick to the last two maps of the Roaring Fork Valley, slides 10 and 11. 10 is before you do the bike trails.
Right.
And I'm noticing how kind of open these green areas, which are the elk production areas, are. Then we flip to the next slide. Mountain bikes right through the middle, and that concerns me. But what I don't see on this map, what it doesn't tell me, and it would be helpful to me, is whose land is that?
Yes. Well, let's go back quickly. So if you see seating in county and neighborhood roads, right, we know that those are right, private lands or county public.
No, I get that.
And then the next
is BLM.
one,
Right.
See, in these two, so we can see that now these are on Forest Service and BLM.
Right.
So that gives us some indication, and I can't tell you, I didn't develop this.
I'd like to know. So if there's some way, I'm just saying in the future,
I will look.
That would be nice for me
Yes,
to know when I see that, whose land is that they're doing these trails on.
Right,
Okay.
right. I'm pretty certain they're public lands, but I can't guarantee that.
But public, but who?
Exactly.
Whose public
Right.
land?
Are they
Yes.
state lands or BLM or Forest Service? Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Vardy.
Thank you. Are you familiar with the Watershed Biodiversity Initiative that's happening in the Roaring Fork Valley?
I'm not.
So it's a landscape level initiative. It's basically doing some pretty comprehensive mapping on game and other species, and the results that come out of that can be really informative for some of this, and it's something that I'd actually really encourage CPW to look at and see if we can make those similar kind of studies happen in other watersheds.
Yes.
To answer the question of where trails should actually go in the big picture.
Great. And the name of that again?
Watershed Biodiversity Initiative.
Okay.
It's held by, or hosted by Tom Cardamone, and it's happening in the Roaring Fork Valley.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Commissioner McDaniel.
Thanks, Robin, for coming today. I couldn't support your comments that you made here today more with regards to trails. I think we have great objectives, and I'll make more comments when we get to the trail planning pieces. We've listed all the right goals in there. I know we have a keen focus about it here from the agency. I do think we lack a disciplined approach about, and even a larger strategy around, well, in an area, how many trails is too many trails? When should we stop taking grant applications for trails? And quit looking at wildlife impacts because we've already determined that this area is saturated. So whether it's via a risk model or scoring criteria, something also that you can easily communicate to the public about why you make the decision you did. Versus, we approve a trail, we say, well, we looked at the wildlife impacts and we were okay with them, or we thought they were minimal. Well, that doesn't give me a lot of information as a member of the public about, well, what did you score? How did it score? How is it different than a trail that might be proposed in my area? I think the more information we can give about that, the fairer the process will be overall. And so later on, we get the trails planning criteria. I'd like to continue to talk about that. Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you. And before I welcome Mr. Grother, we do this whole section, we really only have a half an hour slotted for Robin, Craig, and Fletcher. So we're already at 11:18. I'd like to finish at 11:30 with this section. So if we can try to condense, that would be great. Thank you. Craig Grother, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm Craig Grother. I'm with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And I represent our chapter in Colorado as regional director for the central portion of the western slope here. We have about 3,000 members in BHA here in Colorado. And did you happen to get my?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, great.
We do have it up on our iPads as well.
All right.
Just having a.
So moving right along, my second slide then, when it does come up, was how BHA has been involved in trails and travel management. And I can tell you that we've been participating in forest plan revisions and BLM resource management plans, as Robin mentioned. I mean, that's kind of the land use plans for our public lands. It is. And there are allocations for what we've been talking about, where recreation should be developed, where wildlife should be emphasized, their habitats. Oh, thank you. And those agencies then kind of drill down into individual travel management plans. And so we've been at the table there looking for, designing these trails in appropriate areas. We're not totally against it, obviously, but we want to make sure that the wildlife habitat is considered in those plans. And we've been educating ourselves and participating in your state trails grant program. And we've been probably involved for the past 5 years or so, I suppose, in this process. And we are, as Robin eloquently said, pleased with some of the progress we've made. We still had some concerns up to this point. And we've provided some comments to the Trails program on specific grant applications and also on particularly the non-motorized program. That's where we're having our concerns primarily. And in addition to being involved with you and the federal land management agencies, we've been trying to go to the user groups and organizations and be involved in their planning meetings and so forth. So recently we submitted a letter to the Trails Grant Committee, and Fletcher himself, the program director, and I wanted to kind of go back over some of those concerns that we had. What we're still seeing out there are some long-term cumulative effects to our big game habitat. And I won't repeat exactly what she said, but, you know, we are seeing extensive habitat fragmentation out there on the land from our trails, and it's happening really in all habitat types, from the BLM lands and the lower elevations, and even communities within the valleys, up to the alpine areas on national forest lands. And we continue to see trails proposals in direct alignment with known seasonal concentration areas and migration routes, just like the slides demonstrated a moment ago. And what we're seeing is there are big gamers being displaced from their preferred habitats on the public lands. In the area where I live down the river here in Norwood, you know, they're being displaced onto private lands. There's a lot of game damage that was being talked about in Colburn. And part of the effect of trails is with game damage. So, you know, another problem specifically with these travel plans is the funding, the Trails program is not really looking at the entire picture. It's being directed really at new trail development. It's missing the other elements of travel management plans. What we're seeing is there's a lack of decommissioning of old trails, or rogue trails, if you will, reducing the road density out there. And, you know, all this thought and planning we went into the original travel plan is not being fully implemented. There's often mitigation measures, as in seasonal closures, included in the proposals, but they're ineffective. We're not seeing any presence of or enforcement out there. And there's really kind of a lack of funding and commitment to manage the use out there. So it all kind of begins with the planning and support grants. And in the interest of time, I'll just whiz through this, but, you know, basically, the planning process is being conducted by those proponents and user groups. It's got minimal involvement from other interests, such as us hunters or livestock people that have permits on public lands. We're totally unaware of these plans being produced until they get to the agencies. And so that Trails Master Plan is being handed off to the BLM office or the Forest Service or whatever, and it may or may not require additional NEPA, which is the environmental review process and all that, if you don't know what NEPA is. And they require public input. So we're hoping that we can get better public involvement up front, not just the biologists from the Parks and Wildlife, but the public in general. But at this point, the biologists are being involved early in the planning process, but as I said, it doesn't appear like their recommendations are really fully considered, because we're still seeing applications move forward that should have been declined or modified in some way. And finally, on the actual implementation of these projects, there's really a lack of connection to, like I said before, full implementation of the travel management plans. The funds are directed rather into trail development and marketing, and there's a lack of commitment from the proponent and the agencies for management and stewardship, as well as just development of trails. On the OHV, or off-highway vehicle side of the program, they have a program called Good Management, and we strongly believe that it needs to be developed for non-motorized as well. And I want to say that we're really happy that there's some progress being made, and I'll let Fletcher direct those criteria that you guys were interested in directly because of our limited time. But I thank you for hearing our side of the story and letting us continue this conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate the time and perspective. Questions, or can we jump to Fletcher's presentation, which I think will address a lot of questions if we have them? Great. Okay, Fletcher Jacobs, regarding wildlife considerations and trail planning. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Director Prenslow, members of the commission, Fletcher Jacobs, State Trails Program Manager, and I know we're up against the time, so I'm going to act like I've had an extra pot of coffee here. State Trails Program Wildlife Consideration. So just very quickly as background, the State Trails Program, you guys can read all of the stuff on there, but I think the most important thing to think about is obviously we have our staff. We have a staff of 6, that is the Trails Program. We have our State Trails Committee, which is made up of 9 volunteers that are appointed by this commission that make up trail recreational users across the state. And basically our biggest piece of the way we can play a role in trails in Colorado is through our grant program. Since 2000, we've given away $125 million in funding for trails. And while, again, compared to some of our other programs, is not a lot of money, last year we gave out $12.6 million in trail funding. Us, along with Great Outdoors Colorado, we are the biggest source of funding in the state. That is our biggest way we can help influence trails and kind of address some of these concerns. However, it's very important to note, we are not the only funder of trails in the state, and trails get built all the time without us. And the Trails Program and the way we've kind of set up the process, which I'm going to get into and hopefully begin to address some of the concerns, is our biggest way we can help have an influence when it comes to our partners at the federal level who manage majority of the trails in the state, as well as our county and open space partners. There you see, I just think it's kind of fascinating because we get a lot of comments about trails that, to Commissioner Garcia's question earlier, we don't manage these trails. We only have 2.1% of the trails that we currently have mapped on state property. So we're really relying, it's the Forest Service, BLM as the big land management agencies that are in charge of these trails. So we really need to work with them. And obviously we have the ability to comment via the National Environmental Protection Act. When those come up, if a trail project comes up on federal land, we have the ability to comment via that way, as well as, of course, via the travel management plans, which was mentioned earlier. But really that wildlife impact piece that we have for our state trails grants is our biggest way to kind of work with potential trails that are coming in. So just very briefly, just to give kind of the sense of what the grants are, this is our current, the last 2 years. You actually see we have 5 different grants that we go through. I won't bore you, but you can kind of get a sense of the timing as we go. And it's roughly around 100 grants that we give out each year. And again, last year was about 12.6 million that we gave out. That Colorado the Beautiful, that's on the far right column, that is currently open. This will be the last year of that funding. So typically it's only the 4 grant cycles. Just to continue getting right into it, these are the people that are involved with the trails, because I think this is the biggest misconception, and it's on the Trails Program to make sure we're really educating the public, the commission, everyone on how we really think about these trails. So I'm going to thank our friends in the Northeast region who shared this with this actual slide with me as we talked about what it actually looks like. And you can see we kind of start there at the bottom, the middle there, it talks about the stakeholder groups and just kind of a sense of the process and the amount of people that are taking a look at these different grants when they come in. And there at the bottom, as the example we hold up, one of the things that I occasionally get messages about is our staff doesn't know that they can say no, and I'd like to really make sure I try to fight that misconception that our staff does know. We want to hear their comments. If they have an issue, we want to know about them as the Trails Program, as the regional staff who are reviewing those. And the Magnolia Trail Construction, this was a 2016-17 grant that came in. It was actually ironically right outside of Netherlands, Forest Service property with the mountain biking trail system. They came to our area wildlife manager. We had some concerns because of elk migration corridors. We were not able to successfully address those, and our staff asked us to actually pull that grant. We decided we didn't want to score it. So we've set that to the side, decided not to fund it, and actually now are being able to work with the mountain biking community to say, let's sit down and talk about ways, what is acceptable? Because as you saw on those slides, there's a lot of trails there. How can we improve the trails that are already there? There are ways we can decommission and restore some of the old ones, and we're actually having those conversations, which I think is a great success story. This is just a visual of the process. I think visually just showing you when we get a grant, and I'm going to, since non-motorized was mentioned, this is kind of how we handle it. We now ask that our applicants reach out 1 month prior to our grants being due. So the grants will go live August 1st. We say by September 1st, you need to have been in contact with your area wildlife manager and discussed this trail. And I think Robin brought up a great point. We don't have a giant set list of criteria. Our real ask of them is to sit down and talk through the process so the wildlife manager knows it's coming, and that way in the application they can address, here's the conversation we had. So we're really putting it on the grant applicant to have that conversation, have the discussion. It's seasonal trail closure, what are their concerns, and be able to address exactly what they're going to say on the grant. While they're doing that, obviously we also have our wildlife managers actually fill out their comments, and I want to just address this because kind of the visual there gets the layout. This process was modeled exactly on our land use commenting. So this is the exact process we use when Xcel Energy comes to us and say, we'd like to put a pipeline here, we'd like to, put a tower in. This is the process we follow, where the wildlife manager looks at the maps, looks at all the information as the wildlife expert, fills out their comment sheet. The only difference is instead of turning that over to a third party who's requesting that, they turn it over to our regions who are able to look at it at kind of the landscape level to have that conversation of where does it make sense for us to have trails? Because I'll go ahead and say it, it's kind of the elephant in the room. This came up yesterday. There's 5.7 million people in Colorado. We're going to get in the next 30 years, we're anticipated to get 3 million more. We need to have trails to put them somewhere. So we need to have trails on the landscape. They're our best tool as a manager of the resources and the land to facilitate where people go, and as importantly for this conversation, where people don't go. So we need to figure out where trails are appropriate and make sure we're building them there, and where they're not appropriate, make sure we're not. And I think that's the biggest message we want to get out to all of the applicants as well as the members of the public. So we take those considerations, they go through the region, we get a signed memo from each of the regional managers that as part of that conversation, we want to make sure we share that publicly so everybody knows that these grants have been reviewed. They come to the Trails program, we give them to the appropriate subcommittee, who goes up to the committee, and as we talked about yesterday, comes to you for approval. And during that process, just from the public comment, I'd want to specifically address that. When we receive those grants, they go up on the website, and we'll make sure that we do a better job of doing outreach to our stakeholder groups so they're aware that they're out there, because we take public comment via email at that point. At the subcommittee level, they're allowed to come. It's an open public meeting. Come to that, make comments. At our State Trails Committee meeting, groups are obviously coming, and of course, in front of you. So there are kind of 4 different steps where they can help give that public comment. Just quickly to the non-motorized grants, the specific thing we are looking at for this year, the big concern we keep hearing is the idea of construction and new trails. So last year, this commission approved piloting, breaking out our 3 different grant criteria for the non-motorized trails and having a construction, maintenance, and then a planning support. Currently, we have a large construction, so it's $250,000. Large construction and maintenance, small construction and maintenance, where the cap is $45,000, and then planning support. We think by doing this, we can better do a little more apples-to-apples comparison. So if it's a new trail, we really want to make sure we're addressing all of these concerns that are brought up today. We're looking at all of these. And kind of the second point up there, just the list of, we have changed our scoring criteria, so wildlife considerations are equal weight of all of the other criteria that are on there. And we actually put in some of the language that both Craig and Robin have shared with us, GOB and BHA, to really talk about trying to avoid and minimize these areas, and really letting our applicants know that things like gates, when we talk about seasonal closures, we want them to help us implement, if the Forest Service needs to have a seasonal closure, how are you going to help implement as the grant applicant? So if it's a mountain biking group, are they going to buy the gates? Are they going to buy the education? Are they going to buy trail cameras we can set up to help with that piece of it? Because one of the big pieces when it comes to the good management concept, we all have what the motorized crew has done has been amazing, but the big difference is they have a funding source that allows for law enforcement. On the non-motorized side, our funding entirely comes from Great Outdoors Colorado, the Recreational Trails Program, and the Land Water Conservation Fund. None of those funds can be used for enforcement. So unfortunately, we don't have a way to enforce. However, I think the education piece and letting folks know that by implementing some of these management things, I think we can get there until we figure out a way to get more of a funding source for the non-motorized to help with some of that. So I think we want to go in that direction, and directly to Craig and I had a great conversation last night about the idea of maintenance and stewardship, something that's very important to us, and especially on the non-motorized side. How can we engage some of these volunteer groups like Youth Corps, to help us step up and take the lead with the Colorado Outdoor Stewardship Coalition and Great Outdoors Colorado already starting that process, how we can work together better on that. So those are the ways we're directly addressing that. And then to the third point there, we do have a document called Planning Trails with Wildlife in Mind that was done in the 1990s that the Trails Program is committed to updating, having a draft over the next year that we can start utilizing, because currently I had shared with everyone in the document I sent, we have kind of the 6 different criteria we ask our wildlife managers to use, again, similar to what we use for the land use comment, but we want to really try to give some more robust direction, and we think that manual can help not only with our internal staff, but again to that influencing piece when it comes to Forest Service, BLM partners, and then the grant applicants themselves, so they kind of know what we're thinking about when it comes to that. Finally, I'll open up the questions. I really want to emphasize trails are the best way as land managers and resource managers for us to direct not only where we want people and where we don't, but also importantly for an agency that we want folks to live life outside. This is our way that folks get connected to nature, it's by using those trails. No matter if they're hiking, mountain biking, horseback riding, going fishing, trails are the way they have that connection. So we want to make sure we're doing this right, but we need to continue to make sure we're thinking about where trails are appropriate. Questions?
Thank you, Fletcher. Well presented. I liked the speed talking. Made me really have to pay attention, focus. Commissioner Garcia.
I know we're running out of time, but thank you. And you covered this in the last part, but I had a wonderful conference call with the Old Broads and BHA and RMRI recently, and we talked a lot about management. And as you know, and you can tell from their letters, and you mentioned it, but I'd like to make sure that we really focus on maintenance versus management and distinguish those. And I think you were talking a little bit about it, you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
You know what they're asking of.
Yes, and that's something we're going to continue when it comes to that specific, the model of the good management is a good one. It's not something we can directly drop on there, but it's something we've had these conversations with the BLM and the Forest Service is how better we can help implement these travel management, because that's really what good management is about. We talk a lot about the enforcement piece, but really that's about 10% of what like a BLM crew does is about 10% enforcement. The 90% is the management, it's the signage, it's part of that education piece, and we want to help continue to make sure we're using the non-motorized grant program to support that management piece.
Thank you.
Commissioner Schaefer.
Thank you, and thanks for Robin and Craig for the presentation. I think that there's a couple of conversations that are occurring that are connected but parallel tracks. One is this notion of being able to have wildlife better represented as part of the grant process, particularly the non-motorized. But to go back to the presentations, there's a lot of the consternation that we've heard going back to, Luke Wydell has, interacted with us a number of times about wildlife recreation conflicts. So it's understanding the cumulative impacts and how to be able to best represent future decision-making processes that have that in mind, that we have seen a large proliferation through work from the federal agency partners and the lack of coordination around looking at it in a sort of visionary sense of not just what we want, but what we want to try and ameliorate that has already happened. And I think that this conversation is continually coming up. It's not going to go away. And I don't think it's simply a state trails conversation. I think it goes well beyond that. It's about having a vision of what we want recreation to look like in Colorado, how we want to actually implement that vision, and how we want to do it in a way that crosses the myriad of user groups that are part of the customer base of this agency. That's something that I think that I'd like to say that an ounce of prevention, is worth a pound of cure, but I think we're well past the prevention stage. We're now working in the mitigation stage. And I think that we really have to invest in dealing with this issue in the very short term, because the problems are becoming exacerbated as we move forward. So, this is something I think we're hearing it repeatedly at the commission level. We're hearing it repeatedly in our communities. This is something that I really think that the commission and the agency need to address soon.
Thank you. Commissioner McDaniel.
I just had a quick question. You talked about the percentage on trails on state land versus federal. So if it was Forest Service or BLM and they invite us in to make comments on wildlife concerns on federal lands, what if our concern is that it shouldn't be allowed, can we stop the trail because we manage the wildlife and have jurisdiction over that? Or can they ignore that and just move forward with the trail?
When it comes forward to us as the state trails, we will say, we do not approve the state trails grant funding. That does not stop them from going to get other funding sources.
Oh, so they can go ahead and build it even if we say there's whatever significant wildlife concerns that cannot be mitigated.
Director Prenslow.
Yes, they can. It really depends on who's building the trail. So obviously we have management of wildlife for the people of the state of Colorado, but we do not have regulatory authority on private lands to dictate on private landowners and or the Forest Service. So Forest Service, BLM manage the land, and in theory we manage the resources. We have that responsibility, but we don't dictate can't dictate what happens exactly on that land. So we do have NEPA, National Development Policy Act. There's lots of, on federal land, if it's county or city, we can work through their policy and planning units, 1041 rules, within county rules, but we can't dictate to that.
Commissioner Bray.
Yeah, I think, as to other comments, I think the cat's already out of the bag to a degree, but maybe we should start a conversation of more management on the existing trails. For example, seasonal closures in certain areas, be it calving range, be it winter range, be it whatever it may be. Emphasize some of that a little bit more in some of our conversations.
I'd like to add 2 points. Fletcher, thank you for this, and thank you, Robin and Craig, for joining us. I know that as a trail user, self-enforcement is incredibly powerful. If I'm out hiking or mountain biking in a place I shouldn't be for whatever reason, seasonal closure or muddy trail, and a fellow mountain biker or whatever modality I'm using says, hey, shouldn't be out here, that's going to be more powerful to me almost even than getting a ticket. The other thing is, I really want to second Commissioner McDaniel's thoughts. By no means do I think our staff needs more to do or that we need to put more regulation on anything that we do. But if there is a way that we can better outline certain areas and the larger fragmentation impact, habitat impacts of more and more trails, if there's a way, kind of a strategic plan, or I don't know how it would look, but as I think Commissioner McDaniel suggested it much more eloquently than I am. So, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Great. JT, thank you.
Thank you,
I feel a
Madam
dark
Chair.
force.
JT Ramatsky, Northwest Regional Manager. I just wanted to really quickly add into some of this and maybe better define the roles and responsibilities of our agency and how we interact in some of this. So the Field Operations Branch is the lead on all the land use planning and those types of aspects. And I'm going to tell you that's a major point of what we do in our job. So every district wildlife manager and AWM are also biologists. They're the local experts on the ground. We're embedded as cooperating agencies status with a whole lot of different NEPA analysis. Mad Rabbit's been kind of a point of discussion amongst the commission and other things as well. So we operate off of the basis, and the director already said this, that we're not necessarily a regulatory agency or entity, and we're not going to just come out and say no. And I'm also trying to redefine actually who we are. Because if we continue just to say no to every single trail, all of a sudden we lose credibility, and we're obstructionists in a lot of the societal issues that we're confronted with here. We always said in oil and gas development it was like a shotgun approach, and it was to the earlier point here about it's just a one APD at a time, right? It's one Form 2A at a time. We're not taking in the cumulative impacts. I want to assure the commission that we actually are. We're having a lot of discussions about mapping and GIS efforts and looking at large landscape impacts, cumulative impacts, humanity and human use on the landscape, and then taking some of that and bringing it back into land use planning and for NEPA documents and other things, having a conversation about that and trying to embed ourselves in the community. We've been successful in the agricultural realm because we always sat down and helped them mend a fence or had some coffee and cookies, and the last time we did that at a mountain bike shop, it just doesn't happen very often. So we literally are at the forefront of a new era of trying to redefine who Colorado Parks and Wildlife is and how we engage and become relevant and make sure that we can lead some of these charges. But without these local efforts, we're probably not going to be very successful. So there's an awful lot going on with our agency when it comes to recreation, trails, other things. We're not afraid to say no. And we work really closely with our federal land management agency partners, and sometimes, they're operating also off of a multi-use kind of perspective. So humanity has a role, and we're trying to work with that and be creative and find solutions. So hopefully that helps in some of our internal processes.
Thank you, JT. Assistant Director Mock.
Thank you. And I just want to add to JT's comments. I appreciate that this has risen to the level, even in the EDO's office. We're looking at this at DNR. We kicked off, and I'm looking at Mark Leslie here in the Northeast region. We, following the Shooting Sports Partnership, kicked off a large regional, multi-county, Clear Creek, Gilpin, Boulder, Larimer, Jefferson County, Arapahoe, Roosevelt, Forest, sitting down monthly. They're actually sitting down meeting today on how do we actually coordinate all of this and talk about capacities and talk about land management and partnering up and pooling our resources. This kind of gets also into the document, the shared stewardship MOU that we're working on with the Forest Service. That effort is in some point, maybe we ought to have a presentation, but I do appreciate Parks and Wildlife in their staff and the time that they've lent into this effort. I think it could very well serve as a model. There's also some other local initiatives, but that's the important thing to think, and I'm putting on my local government hat here a little bit, is how important it is to really engage the local communities in these efforts, in the resources that they provide. You think about the access into a lot of our backcountry, it begins on a county or municipal road. Before it turns into a lot of times a Forest Service road. And we're seeing those impacts. I could show you slides here of the number of vehicles that are piling up, the impacts to, we're now having a conversation with search and rescue and how that has become an unsustainable type of situation. So a lot of this goes into that, and we're starting to put that together, and I do appreciate Parks and Wildlife for taking the time. And as these efforts kind of build, we put a model together, I think we'll be able to come back with something here that hopefully we can continue to replicate and have these conversations statewide. I do think it's very important.
It's great to hear the attention from the governor's office there. Okay, I am very sorry to say that twice now we've had to punt the big game management workshop, and I'll repeat that I think it's essential that we understand these concepts. So I'm going to work with, well, first I want to thank Craig, Brian, Julie, and Andy, and apologize directly to you guys. I appreciate you guys making the trip, taking the time. I know you have plenty of other things that you could be doing than watching us deliberate on big game season structure for a day and a half. So appreciate the patience and flexibility. I will work with all four of you, with Reed, with Jeff, with Dan, to figure out the best way. I know that people have talked about webinar. So I want to explore that. Commissioner Haskett.
I think that we should take Commissioner Hauser's suggestion and do 2 full days, because it seems like we're always running over. We need those, and we're here.
I agree. And I also think that one of the suggestions, I don't know if this was from Commissioner Hauser, that, or maybe it doesn't matter, regarding some of these educational things, like big game management, park passes and park structure, some of those kinds of things we've talked about. These meetings, oftentimes we run over because the decisions that we make are important, and the public comment and the action items. So some of the educational stuff that don't require action and decision, we might be able to bump those into a webinar type situation. I know that, professionally, most of my meetings are video conference. You can share a screen, you can do a presentation, you can see everyone's face, you can mute people. So, my favorite, personal. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So, and Commissioner Haskett, I feel like we have agreement that we should probably be going to two-day meetings. I've heard it not just from everyone. So, Laura, we'll work on that. Okay. Does anyone have any other parting thoughts? Okay. Commissioner Haskett.
Do we have to do the consent agenda, or did I miss that?
We did the consent agenda.
Never mind,
Yep.
sorry.
No problem. We did a lot. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Meeting adjourned.